C-121 Hypocritical. Year 150. Research into the black star gems soon yielded some results. They had mild generic anti-magic properties, but these anti-magic properties are exceptionally effective against holy and light elements. That said, once consumed, they only stay in the body for a short moment of time. I have no way of recreating divine magic to test out the effectiveness of these black star gems. Do you have any divine abilities? I asked K. Nope. Sigh. It may be effective against holy and light, and it's a conjecture that this extends to divine type of magic. I had preferred something more conclusive. Next, was research on how to actually use these black star gems. For Edna, Ferris and Jura, I made specialized helmets with these gems inserted, hopefully that would give them some protection against the mind-controlling effects of the gods. Again, it's a speculation if this works. My requests to gather the documents, records and books went quite okay. It wasn't hard to gather details about people who were punished for their heresy. Heretics were those who turned against their gods. I also wonder whether there are anyone that turned against me with a special class. Is there a heretic class? The Valthorns and Priesthood were responsible for combing through the documents for any objects or items that may be of interest. Most of them were crap, and there's a lot of misinformation in the records. Things written down are speculated by some priest that over time became the canon understanding of a particular subject. Again, rubbish. But from the pile of rubbish, there are some possible chances. Items or weapons mentioned in passing. Sea serpents and certain items harvested from the deep sea. Strange. Items from the sea are common, but for them to be used by the heretics. Why? This was where old myths emerged. Nera, Gaia, Hawa and Ava are referred to the four temples of the continents, but in many smaller islands, many have more localized faiths, shamanistic rituals and animism. For smaller islands with their lives intertwined with the seas and oceans, many sailors pay homage to various sea gods and sea guardians, and strangely, the four gods don't overtly oppose such homages, even if they frown on them. If the land had seen so much destruction from the demons, the sea, for most part, has been spared of the destruction. If there are any civilizations deep underwater, they must have watched the surface fight endless, pointless battles, and they would have records from a long time ago. The demons did not invade the sea. Naturally, the faith of those island nations seemed to be a bit more obscure and strange. I felt like I was going down a rabbit hole, trying to find what's going on, really. Maybe my answer to this problem lies in the past. If the memories of that ancient tree are true, there may be a time from before the demons and heroes. The lands, which have over the millennia seen hundreds or thousands of demon kings, would have been so destroyed that the odds of records surviving would be close to nil. But the sea, the ocean so vast, if there are records somehow submerged, they may still survive. If luck is on our side. Thus, I commanded the Valthorns and priests to gather all the myths, legends and folklore of the smaller island nations, and the beliefs of the seafarers and sailors. If there was an equivalent of Polynesian myths, I want to know. Again, it wasn't hard to gather a general one, but to have it in detail, most of such myths were spoken from one generation to the next, hardly written. The Valthorns and other employees of the overall FFA would have to go and meet these islanders and conduct interviews. They started with the nearby islands. The variation in founding myths and all that differ rather greatly, and quite a few seem to have suffered influence from the four temples. There were far more parallels than I thought was normal. The sea and the oceans are home to many giant creatures, the largest of them are the Zerodons, or world turtles. The floating Zerodons, large turtles with islands on their backs, are creatures spoken of in legends and tattoos, very rarely appearing, and even if they did, their presence is often accompanied by a thick fog, so no one is really sure. The most unique of these beliefs stated that the first denizens of the world came on the back of these Zerodons, and that these Zerodons had the ability to sail from one world to another, through portals mortals cannot even fathom. Long ago, when the world was bare and empty, of only land and sea, the Zerodons came to the world and brought the first plants, animals and trees. Another variant of these myths, more common in the southern islands, that the world and many others were on the back of massive world serpents, Zerodons and fishes. Those stellar bodies that moved quickly across the sea of stars were traveling on speedy world serpents, the slower ones, on the Zerodons. If these Zerodons do exist, they may well be minor deity-class creatures, maybe more if they lived for very long. If they are indeed of the multiverse, then it would make sense that they have the power to resist the divine. Surely creatures of that level would consider gods nothing more than peers. There were lesser myths too, and it still took some time to digest them, to separate those that may have some use, and some that did not. What's strangely common in the island myths were the tales of local heroes. Quite unlike the common zeitgeist from the temples, which often contained heroes from faraway lands. These island epics were tales of how ordinary men rose up to challenge great beasts. That said, the power level described in these epics were not at the level of the demon kings. They were more local nuisances, dealing with problems that affected the islands, or just the smaller chain of islands. Dash. The bards are having a good time. Jura chuckled. Edna and Ferris were next to him. They met more regularly, now that they have similar challenges. With all the stories that Eon's asking for, they are making good money. They met in Yvonne's academy, in theory supervising, but mostly just watching a large group of young students practice simple movements. Jabs, thrusts, parries. These were children aged 6 to 12, and they were separated into groups to reflect their relative levels of competence. So, did you get a mental attack? Jura asked. I haven't, but then again, maybe I won't know. I made them all a necklace and a ring made of the Black Star gems, after Ferris complained that the helmet was impractical. Sometimes, simple stuff is best. No, but I really wish there were more of us. Leveling someone up to the cap requires something like the Rotted Lands, and now that the Rotted Lands is much smaller, it's also harder for it to generate high-tier hybrids for us to fight. Jura just explained frankly. Outside of our spars with the heroes, we'll most likely have to travel to fight demon champions and walkers to gain levels. We'll be busy once the rift opens. Dash. Tree Spirit, are you there? Akrenif the wolf asked one day. We wish to speak. Yes. We wish to leave the forest, and if you may, guide us to where there is magic in the land. Magic in the land, you mean, ley lines. Now that my network of trees and roots spread across the continent, there's actually multiple ley lines. But, my soul forge requires different types of energies, so an increase in the quantity of ley lines merely increases the total mana available to me, but does not result in me unlocking a different color to my ley line. There are multiple dungeons across the continent too, and they are either black, or red, or blue colors, which I already have. So, despite my expansion, my soul forge colors did not grow. The wolf sniffled momentarily, shaking and nodding its head, and then answered. Yes, I believe that is what they are called by the mages. The shamans refer to them as just magic in the land. Can you help us ensure safe passage? We see many humans and creatures who would fear us and attack us. That can be done. I shall assign you an escort. Ferris arrived 5 days later by express beetle. This is Akrenif, a wolf. He wishes to travel to the ley lines of the land, and I saw it fitting that a great druid is to escort him. Druids are also commonly seen with animals and tamed monsters, so a massive wolf monster traveling with a druid would not raise alarms. Well met, wolf. Ferris said with a friendly bow. Akrenif sniffed him slightly, and spoke. He smells of the city. Ferris shrugged. My tasks often lead me to the cities. But that should not detract from my task of escorting you. It is fine. The wolf shook its head. Let us go. They traveled mostly through the smaller routes, walking the entire way. When they finally arrived at the nearest magical ley line, a blue one, the wolf sniffed and tapped its massive paws on the ground a few times. It was using a skill of some kind, and then, that was it. That was rather boring. The wolf repeated it a few times in most of the other ley lines or places with natural mana. Are you looking for something else? I asked at the 4th ley line they visited. No, not really. This is right. We merely sensed its strength. The wolf responded. And your reach is far. Ah, it is for a shaman to regularly visit nearby ley lines, as shamans tap onto ley lines for strength and power. Their health and condition is critical to a shaman's strength, and also why certain types of shamans often live in strange places. Quite like that of a witch. Ferris merely shrugged. Have I met a witch? Dash. Kay could fly was something I expected. What I did not expect was how high she could fly. She could fly almost to the edge of the sky itself, almost crossing into space. Space was, as she described it, strange. The moons moved erratically at times, as if forcefully yanked out of place. It also occurred to me that if she really wanted to win her fight against me, all she needed to do is fly really high up and bombard me from where I cannot reach. Her magical projectiles would lose some of its power at that distance, but she would not be harmed at all at that distance. Of course, I kept my mouth shut. The heroes could have used a similar tactic against the Demon King too, unless, of course, the Demon King also can fly at that distance. I wonder what the world would be like if the next Demon King was some kind of alien monstrosity that floated on low planetary orbit, bombarding the world with dropships filled with demons. We killed the Demon King 5 years ago. Yes, year 145. So there's 5 years left. There's 5 years left, right. The rifts usually open 1 to 2 years before. You can start hunting demons once that happens to raise your levels, if you feel not confident. But once you cross level 100 as a hero. Kay nodded. Oh yeah, it feels like I've done this for umpteenth times. Is this what being a non-player character feels like? Repeating the same shit to different players every damn time. It's boring. In the meantime, I scheduled more practice sessions for Kay with Edna and Jura. Edna gained a level or 2 from spars with Kay. Dash. The Rotted Land shrunk even more. At this point, it is only a quarter of the Rotted Land's peak. Furthermore, this quarter is sliced up by all the tree roads, and the new nations that now inhabit it. The reclaimed lands. I wondered whether there was a way to tap into blood magic as a source of new mana color for my soul forge. Perhaps, by way of a rune on the general population that granted some of their mana to me. I have red, from a volcano. Yellow, from a runic formation. Blue, from my existing trees and networks. Black, from a magical ley line. From ley lines throughout the continent, most of them were already blue, black or red. Do I have green? Shouldn't trees be green? Or is it from something else? If there's black, there should be white too. Frustrated, I shared my concerns about the colors with Lily's. Greater than no clue. Mine is black from all the death of people. Less than. No progress. I believe demonic magic is perhaps one color. This blood magic is also another. What other sources of magic? Wind. Water. I decided to try for both. If wind could be a source of magic, all I needed was to spawn a lot of trees in places where there is a lot of wind, and find a way to convert that wind energy into mana. Perhaps that'll give me another source. If my experience with blue was correct, I'll need at least 10,000 wind harnessing trees to unlock a new color. For a month I experimented with various grasses, reeds and coconut trees, attempting to find a way to convert wind to mana. Of course, my artificial mind submitted some rather fascinating tree species for my consideration too. Dandelions. And windmill tree monsters. The windmill trees were trees with flexible branches that could twist along with the wind. They were monsters first, trees second, and they actually attack people around them. Carnivorous little creatures. Naturally, they went into the biolab. Research option unlocked. Windmill trees 18 months needed. Research option unlocked. Wind energy harvesting. Grassy fields 18 months needed. Research option unlocked. Wind to mana 24 months needed. Fuck. 2 years. I decided to work on water-based plants instead. We were already experimenting with swamp trees and swamp-adapted trees. Now, the goal was to turn wave to mana, and its associated relationships. The Druids already had a large collection of plants that exist on the shoreline. These included also certain forms of seaweeds and algae. Research option unlocked. Algae to energy, seaweeds, stage 1 to 12 months needed. Research option unlocked. Swamp wave barriers 18 months needed. Research option unlocked. Saltwater tolerance stage 1 to 24 months. Oh well, I started the research anyway. If I can unlock both of them, that should lead to more mana, and hopefully a new color. Wind and water seemed natural enough. Dash. A few minor wars broke out among my subordinated states. The Valthorns had to abstain from conflict, and also work with the priesthood. Together they were tasked with protecting innocents from the fighting. The entire central continent is a hodgepodge of rulers. The FFA and the Valthorns essentially existed as a federal government with power over all outbound diplomacy, religion, certain military rules and rights, interstate trade, racial matters and certain overarching criminal prosecution powers. There's also federal taxes, and also the FFA regulated all of the major transport and trade routes. Below that are the states, who retain domestic power, budgetary control over the finances of their own states, internal state trades, local criminal and law powers. These are the allied and subordinated states. It's complicated simply because certain states were captured, but we have spared the local rulers in exchange for their cooperation. So there are differences in the laws and powers of the local rulers, depending on their respective history with the FFA. Those who converted to my side willingly retained most of their domestic powers, surrendering only minimal external bound powers. Again, this hodgepodge of powers, laws and all is from history. I did not want to forcefully standardize the laws, simply because there are local cultures that affect things. For example, a nation with a treefolk majority has certain local rules and regulations that cater to their needs that would be unrealistic and burdensome to apply in a city with centaur population as a majority. There simply was no way to apply a one-size-fit-all approach to laws, without creating unhappiness. In fact, in the Freshlands Treaty College, there's quite a large segment of the curriculum that focused on the various variant laws throughout the central continent. The administrators and nobles, unfortunately for them, have to be able to navigate this massive landmine of rules and regulations. Taxes too are increasingly complicated. At the federal level, we levy a tax on the nations itself, a 10 to 30% cut of all incomes, depending on their past agreements with us. Some places, like the Six Ports, and Freshka, are considered directly administered territories of the FFA, so they only have a single layer of tax. But for the Allied states, they would sometimes face dual taxes, one from the state, and one more from the federal authority, if the state decides to pass on the tax obligation to the local rulers. Naturally, this is also a source of dispute. For example, a kingdom where one of their larger merchant organizations moved to another, perhaps for trade and tax issues, would then raise a complaint to the FFA and the Representative Council, but even if we made a good decision, things don't always work out. Over time, Cavio explained that it's quite normal for a decision to be made by the council, but the two disputing parties still resolve to war. It tends to flare up more when the entire continent is at peace. It's like, after they are no longer scared of a war with the temples, they now turn on each other. So, we just let them fight. The Valthorns and the federal forces would abstain, and we would also set up certain rules of engagement. Even assassinations were permitted, so long as the targets were all members of the ruling party and the local military force. There's also separate food stockpiles, the general food stockpiles and water sources which are acceptable targets, and the Valthorn and priesthood stockpiles, which are off limits. If the combatants overstepped the boundaries, the Valthorns would interfere and we would crush whoever offended the rules first. It wasn't hard to pinpoint who's at fault when my army of artificial souls monitored it. If that failed, Andy couldn't pinpoint it, it was also possible to just capture the leaders, ship them to Freshka for a trial. Patrick would then use his mind-reading abilities to discern the truth. Occasionally, I would send a reminder to all the other nobles by skewering the offending noble. I suppose I am a hypocrite. Of course, the idea of letting my states fight each other was strange for Kay, who seemed to have the concept that the world should be all kumbaya and everyone should be friends. People will have disputes. Even if there's no demon king, no demons, even if there is excess, people will fight. It's good for the army too. Those who fight gain levels, and I have more people that I can poach for the Valthorns. It also helps to clearly delineate the difference between the federal authority and the state authority. Citizens that lived through such interstate wars all learn that we have different roles, and generally have far higher loyalty to the federal authority than the state rulers, simply because the wars cause them to realize that their state rulers are just all about power. C-122 Swaying Grass. Year 151. The clock is ticking, and my research continued. Some of my research commenced a little too late, so only the algae to energy research was completed. There are many kinds of algae. Each type chose a slightly different mix of specializations to excel in their respective environments. I recall in my earlier studying days that there were certain types of seagrass or seaweeds which swayed and moved with the motion of the waves, and there are also documentaries about how certain types of deep-sea algae actually feed on geothermal vents, or certain fungi that lived in volcanic lakes. These are alien life in some ways. Either via waves to mana, or geothermal algae to mana, I'd hope to arrive at some new source of mana. The thought about algae also brought me back to my much earlier days of coping with a growing country. The poop problem. There was also the whole trash to energy, and incinerator. There may be a way to do the same to poop. Poop to mana. I wonder whether this Soul Forge thing is just some subliminal messaging about power source diversity. Anyway, poop problems. Poop to mana. Taking my earlier research to the next stage, in combination with the algae blooms. As the research into water-based plants continued, one of my skills upgraded. Rootnet upgraded. Basic connection with shallow seagrass established. Then came the usual messaging spam. I had to filter out a lot of garbage from the seagrass. In places where the sea isn't that deep, these seagrass created underwater meadows, where fishes and other monsters live. I found them similar to floodplains where the grasses and other plants have adapted to recurring floods. Still, this connection into the seagrass is the first time my senses extended out to the shallow sea. Again, everything is really murky, and my hearing, sight abilities don't work that well underwater. It's muffled, or too noisy and loud. Yet, this is a positive thing. If seagrass is possible, then, ocean grass would be the next step. I remember in our world that seagrasses were local and constrained to the seas, and do not grow in the deep oceans. But if I could expand my research into seagrass and make them more durable and hardier in deep waters. Either that, or have a look at the undersea maps. Perhaps there are ancient land bridges where seagrasses can cross, though from what I see so far, the central continent is really far from any of the other continents. Or maybe there's a hidden underwater chain of mountains. Ah well. Mom. Arlissa said to Lausanne one morning. You're good at fighting, right? Lausanne paused and turned to face her daughter. She wasn't sure where her daughter was going with this question. Kids tend to ask the weirdest things. I am, but against monsters or bad guys. Why? Can you win against a demon king? Lausanne shook her head. No. That stung at a part of her that once wanted to be a hero. A demon king is a special existence, my dear. It's one of those creatures where only those chosen by the gods can defeat. Is Eon a god? Lausanne paused. Sort of. He chose you, right? I mean, a long time ago. She sipped on her morning cup of tea, and bit into a slice of bread. Arlissa noticed her mom's silence. Is Eon a god? Sort of. What does that mean, Mom? She took a deep breath. Gods exist in a spectrum, a range of powers. There are weak gods and stronger gods. Eon is one of the world-bound demigods, and is on the weaker side, but it is gaining strength over time. Someday it will be as powerful as the elder gods. Arlissa nodded. She appreciated the honesty. She somehow knew, despite her youth. Perhaps it is a gift of children, to be able to sense the truth and lies of their parents. So yes, I was chosen. By luck or misfortune that I was. There, with Grandma in the village then. We hid. We survived. Eon has watched over us since then. Honestly, I remember little of those early days. I was far too young. Okay, Mom. Arlissa nodded. Some of the meaning was lost on her, but she got the gist of it. Can Eon choose me too? I believe you have already been chosen. Lausanne sighed. She knew of the blessing. I told her, and she took it with a mix of gratefulness and fear. Something she confided in Lofen a lot. Mom, how did you deal with it when Eon started training me? Lausanne asked Lofen. How do you cope with the expectation? Lofen shook her head. I didn't. Things were smaller back then, when it was just us in that small ring of trees. When we were just hustling to survive the winters, when the girls had to hunt our own animals without any of the trained warriors. When Eon trained you, it was just helping us survive. Giving us a chance. Not now though. Now, Eon's power has grown, and he is the guardian deity of the entire continent. For Arlissa, her expectations, and what everyone wants from her, will be higher. Her challenges, her enemies, they will be like yours in your later years. When you were special, Lausanne blushed. It was embarrassing to remember the days when people referred to the then teenager as Lady. They still call her Lady today, but somehow, it's a lot more normal and appropriate. As your mother then, all I could do was pray and hope for your safety. Elves like us rarely betray the guidance of our home tree spirits, their wisdom and foresight beyond that of our own. If you let Arlissa walk the path, it's something you should really sit down and have a long chat with TreeTree. Its power grows, and so will Arlissa. Even if her talent is no better than yours, she will exceed your power once she reaches maturity. When that happens, she will be fighting nothing less than the greater demons. That makes me afraid. I never knew what it's like to fear for someone else. Lofen gave her daughter a hug. Then you know how it's like for me to feel, with you so far away. But Eon was always with you, isn't it? Lausanne thought about Warden. Warden's power grows with mine. The star monolink allowed it to always reproduce a lesser variant of almost all my powers. It is something unique about the possessions of the devoted. She is young, and one day you will have to let go. Eon will give her wings and weapons we cannot yet imagine, as he once did, with you. It's now on you to choose. Clip her wings, or teach her how to better use them. Eon will not impose if you choose otherwise. He has eyes on the young talents all over the continent. He can spare you that choice. Time has changed. We are no longer desperate, our survival no longer hanging by a thread. Lausanne sat and wondered. Indeed, Lofen is right to say I would not force them. The blessings I grant to Lausanne is both her luck and misfortune to be in the right place, and at the right time. Arlissa's in a position of privilege. In a way, she inherited her power. Hey. Kay walked into Stella's apartment. You sure you don't want to come along? Kay tried to reconcile with Stella after their bad first encounter a while back. Partly because Kay has matured enough. Kay even told her about the journal, but Stella just shook her head. No, I am rather content here. Her apartment was filled with artwork, many of them made as posters for the various Valthorn projects. She found confidence and joy in painting. If anything, the sense of progression from levels seemed to make her feel better, and helped to reinforce her identity. She poured her energy and negativity into her art. It's strange how the sensation of leveling up made her progress seem more real, more tangible. Even as she toiled at something as abstract and subjective as art, the levels were an anchor. It made me realize that maybe levels would be useful for those who struggled with their own self-worth. That having something to hold onto, that I am a high-leveled artist, or I am a high-leveled warrior was a strong reminder that things are not that bad. Kay sighed. The world is a large place, Astia. Come with me, see the world. It'll help your art. I will, someday. But let me hit level 40 as a painter, then I will. She's at the crux, a level 39 painter. Do you want me to wait for you? No need. If I do travel, I will first visit the sites on this continent. Though her confidence has seen some improvement, her people skills remain lacking. More like, she's still not very fond of being with people. Maybe she's just allergic to people. Kay nodded and just left. After that, Kay came to see me. I've arranged with Alvin and Hans to visit them in the south. I'll be gone for a year or two. Sure. I mean, what could I say? She's not exactly my servant, we're just partners at this point. She packed up, said goodbye to some of those she's close with, mostly merchants and some other adventurers. She's got a big traveling bug, and she's been going from town to town, visiting almost every kingdom and nation along the way. Mostly to just have some local coffee or tea, sit around, fight a monster or two, make some money sparring with some upstart nobles, have sex with some gorgeously good-looking dude by the beach, things young teens on a European-style backpackers trip or gap year do. I suppose it also ties in with her confusion and lack of direction in her life as a hero. The journal loosened her chains, but she still doesn't know where to go. She needed this time off, to think and find herself. Both of them are lost in their own ways. Then again, most of us are lost. There was a bit of drama in the TreeTree College during this year, when one of the lordlings attacked and significantly paralyzed another lordling. My eyes were watching, but I decided not to act, simply because this wasn't the first time the two squabbled, and it seemed like they had a bit of bad blood. Rivals and stuff. I think I could help the paralyzed lordling, but I decided to wait and let the drama unfold. Life should have consequences, and I wanted to see it. The family of both lordlings got into the fray, and they had discussions that quickly broke down to little wars and skirmishes. Again, we let it happen. I see this as a way of the natural aristocracy imposing its own cruel version of meritocracy and survival of the fittest. The principal asked me to intervene, of course. I rejected him, and told him to buy a big pack of popcorn and watch the drama unfold. If I let kingdoms go to war with each other and assassinate each other, was I going to stop them here? But you said the FTC is a safe place. Safe from everything else. But I suppose, not each other. He's only paralyzed, that can be fixed. And if they ask me to, I will. At a cost, of course. Conflict is natural. Survival of the fittest is natural too. I considered the implications of ending the cycle, what would happen in a world without heroes and demon kings. If I removed this source of conflict, what happens next? It is not world peace, and I think of my own world too. Home. Earth was never at peace. They would fight, they would go to war and use heinous weapons. Individuals with desires and needs will inevitably clash with each other. This world would then naturally go to war. Perhaps the four temples will then be at each other's throats, the current unity in a common enemy no longer applicable. But those wars will be less devastating than the Demon King. I am sure of it, simply because the kinds of power the temples can unleash is fearsome, but nowhere near the multi-million single-day deaths that Demon Kings have done before. So, it's still good to end the cycle, especially from the perspective of the living, sapient beings. But for trees, the end of the common enemy would result in an expansion of sapient beings over time, and that would encroach on the natural territory of the others. Would the next stage of that conflict be man versus nature, once the Demon King is out of the way? It wasn't a pleasant thought to consider. The two heroes that Kay would soon meet were busy doing what heroes normally did. That was, build a harem, make babies, establish new kingdoms, and generally enjoying their lives. Alvin established his kingdom in the southern continent, by essentially turning a few of the princesses and queens into this harem. Their territories were then amalgamated into his new kingdom. Hans traveled back to the eastern continent and claimed the right to rule over a few cities and towns that lost their leaders from the terrible demonic attacks. Of course, this also involved admitting a lot of women into his harem. The two kings were clearly competing on the harem part, even if they both didn't say it. I think all these heroes need a harem education program to explain the risks of establishing a harem and the subsequent problems that would arise. Harris had the problem. Even today, his successor kingdoms continue to fight with each other. They have trade wars, stupid sanctions against each other. Again, I am not in the business of correcting stupid people, so I let them be. I gave Lovis the fourth soul strengthening seed, as my specialist spearmaster. I also asked the three of them, Edna, Ferris and Lovis, who would want to take on the role as Eons Demonslayer. Ferris flat out rejected it, as the new class deviated far too much from his current one as a druid. Edna was rather happy as a knight, so Lovis also accepted the new class, as my new unique class holder. Once she accepted the new class, her spearmaster class disappeared, but her classes were subsumed under the Eons Demonslayer. She obtained my anti-demon aura and buffs against demons. In short, the damage she takes from demons reduces significantly, and the damage she deals to demons significantly increases. But like my own hero fragment buff, I am not sure whether it applies to demon kings. We would have to test it out the next time a demon king comes around. It took her a good month to get used to the power of her new class, and it's also a strangely twisted class. Once she accepted the unique class, I somehow gained access to her thoughts and memories, and also some insight into her history and her past. She was one of the orphans, just like Edna and Ferris, and when she received the class almost 30 years ago, back in year 123, she was a child. She was brought into the Valthorns as the Freshlands recovered, and has since then moved up. She lagged behind both Edna and Ferris in leveling, though she had practiced a lot more. This was at a level beyond Patrick's mind reading, in the sense that it was a lot more personal, more nuanced, and contained more details of things. I felt bad, really, that this class gave me such direct access into her mind. It made me realize that perhaps the hero class is actually a unique class granted by the gods, and as such, if they have access into the minds of their heroes, then the next step after access is they could alter them significantly. Which is thus evidenced by all the mind control. I spoke to her personally, alone as she dipped herself into the biolab for further examination. She was slightly afraid, but also excited and honored. Her soul spring was now different. Instead of the usual blocks, it was made entirely out of a tree, with roots holding onto all the blocks. The blocks themselves had roots growing into them. Each class presented itself differently in the spring, and this class was a domineering one. It absorbed all her other classes, and she was now a single class. Eons Demonslayer. Nothing else. Can you hear me? I spoke as I delved into her soul spring, examining her energy. She's asleep, yet awake here. Yes. She was confused, and this, to her, is like a dream-like state. It's not too far off. The spring was vigorous, like Jura and the other two. The spring's vigor was the essential component, though not the only one, of a person's level cap. The vigor seemed to determine how many skills or levels a person could support. I wonder, why am I not affected by it? I asked Lilies. Greater than heroes, because the gods grant them boundless vigor. Us, trees, and other beings like us, for we derive our vigor from the land and the world around us. Dragons and magical creatures that tap into the land or exist on some outside source of vigor too would not have a level cap. But mortals, no. Treefolks have a higher level cap than mortals, as a part of their vigor is from the land, yet they very rarely reach those heights. Less than. Wait, what? I have so many treefolk followers. Where are my super-leveled treefolk? The highest leveled treefolk in the central continent is a woodshaper at level 74. He mainly shapes wood into utensils and tools, but also does a lot of larger scale projects like defensive walls, buildings, castles made of wood and all that. I decided to speak to him, and awarded him a gift for skills. It significantly improved the finesse of his woodshaping, and asked him to aid in making weapons against the demons. C-123 Entree Keys. Year 152. Lilies introduced me to an interesting new friend. It was a massive turtle, the size of a bus, that somehow managed to secretly swim through the rivers and lakes. I had eyes and ears, but in the water, it still managed to evade my detection. It clearly had some skills, and the way it communicated was strange. The turtle stopped at the side of the lake, and touched one of Lily's floating platforms. It seemed to use Lily's way of communication. Greater than I am Valasira. Pleased to meet you, Eon. Less than. It was a magical turtle or tortoise thing, resembling a Zeratin, but too small to be one. But I asked to be sure. Greater than yes, I am a young Zeratin. It is a common question, and I have lived for as long as lilies. We heard of your search for tales of the sea, and I am here to answer what I can. It is not often that one of the spirits of the land seeks out the spirits of the sea. Less than. Is there a catch? With lilies, there wasn't any. Lilies was just willing to share, especially with someone like me whom they view as an equal. Greater than so long as we are never hunted on your lands and your rivers, that is good enough. Less than. I said. Greater than it is so. It seems you seek the origins of the gods. Less than. They lived so long, surely there are ways. Greater than we do what spirits of our kind do. We swim to other worlds where the demons cannot follow. Less than. I felt like that turtle just dropped a bombshell on me. So there clearly are other worlds, and not only that, the turtle is able to go there. It paused momentarily. Greater than we can only carry what that can fit on our backs, and our void mana determines how often we can go and what we can take. For spirits of you power, we cannot do so. Less than. Void mana. Where have I heard that before? Ah, that princess from so many years ago. So that princess was headed in the right direction. Greater than, and we have time. Less than. Valasira spoke. He, or it, floated on the shores of Lily's lake. I made a large wall of trees so that he would not be seen, and then added a layer of camouflage and mist. Here was a creature who traveled to other worlds, and it would not be. Fuck. So there are multiple worlds with similar problems. But also, there is a way to escape. Patrick's idea of hiding the world, or somehow moving the world away has merit. Greater than we believe they are creatures or beings that reached a certain yet unknown high level, and obtained the second tier of the system. We also speculate there is either a system that existed above this one, or a tier to the current system. In any case, the gods have access to a higher set of powers and rights. We do not know how to get there, and those who have, could not reveal it to us. Less than. An admin system, or console access, isn't it? Mozart referred to himself as administrator. Maybe it's just a set of administrator passwords which granted them access to that system. Greater than we suspect so, though their names are different across worlds. Less than. Greater than certainly. Zeratans meet each other to mate, to raise our eggs and our young, and discuss the matters of our safety, and of the multiverse. Greater than. Greater than as Zeratans of the sea, we know little of these otherworldly invaders. They have a homeworld, or a chain of worlds somewhere, but their world lacks seas, rivers or lakes, so we cannot create the interplanar mist and swim there. So, we don't know beyond that, and who controls them there. Our great elder once tried to stop the demons, but the gods' puppets turned on our elder. Less than. A waterless world. I see. Also, these interplanar turtles need large bodies of water to move around worlds. That's a rather odd restriction to their power. Greater than our abilities have adapted us to traveling to other worlds, and would not be useful to you. Large quantities of void mana is the first step to any interplanar travel. Less than. Void mana. How do I get that? It seemed the turtle read my mind. Greater than void mana requires one to dabble in higher magics, or, if you have it naturally. Like us. Less than. Wait, does this also imply that the spirit trees in those stories may actually have void mana instead of star mana? Perhaps, it is a path along the road of the domains, that I may have one of those choices in the future. I would presume that there have to be further domain choices, that level 150 isn't the only time one chooses their domain. Given that my first domain choice happened at level 150, it's possible that the next domain choice happens at either level 200, level 250 or level 300. If level 150 was the one and only domain choice, then I may be quite fucked. The turtle was silent for a moment, then answered. Greater than no. Less than. That meant a high level is not really necessary to get the power to travel to other worlds. Even that princess managed to expose herself to void mana, she was not higher than level 50 then. So there are ways to access void mana. Perhaps even naturally. Are there plants that naturally produce void mana? If I could create a farm of such trees or plants. The turtle just shook its massive head. It probably didn't know. Not that I can blame them. What else did I want to know? But already I have a lot to work with. Greater than elevated authority in a specified field of the system. Less than. Ah darn. The system works like users making and interacting with it, and domain powers are super user rights. Gods eventually reach admin rights. But what is this system? Are gods the creators of it, or are they just glorified administrators? If there are just administrators, surely the creator must be a lot more powerful. The turtle left after a while, but it promised to return again someday. We wish to reopen diplomatic relationships, discreetly. An Ava envoy arrived on our shores, disguised as a regular merchant. They met with an audience of the representatives, and Kavio. Kavio was about to retire after decades at the helm, to be replaced by one of the representatives. They had a mini-election to select the representative leader. And why would we even bother? Kavio barked. His mood was rather foul. Another lord in the meeting quickly intervened. Representative leader Kavio, wait. Let's hear him out. The Temple of Ava does not believe or participate in the slander against Eon or the Central Continent. Absolute rubbish. All the evidence collected so far, it's quite clear Ivan Church participated in the propaganda. Liars. They are liars. I whispered to Kavio's ears, and he knows it too. After all, we did not sit idle after the blockade was broken. The restoration of our eyes and ears in these hostile lands were one of the great priorities since then. Lies, envoy. Kavio repeated. Let it be known that we do not appreciate the lies. The envoy gulped. Patrick used his mind-reading abilities. The envoy screwed up anyway. He knew it was a lie too, but he was confident. He had a skill to resist mind-reading, but he was horribly underleveled against Patrick. The Ivan Temple did want to open diplomatic relations, but the leadership hoped to extort some kind of agreement or aid, since they had a lot of damage to undo. Eon notes you did not come to our shores in good faith. This negotiation is over. Kavio sent him off. The representatives were baffled. Thank your foolish gods that we do not send you back in a body bag. The envoy left at haste. One of the Valthorns, without the use of my class seeds, managed to upgrade his own class to Archmage. Archmage has been one of those elusive classes to create, though I did have Archmage classes obtained from the dead. I would say the magic of the Central Continent is not significantly more advanced than the other continents. Magic research is mostly the pursuit of eccentric individuals, so, while the Central Continent is safer than the other continents, and my various abilities did seem to improve the speed of gaining levels, they still tend to plateau. To summarize, with magic, what I had were mages of a high level, but did not have particularly unique abilities. The process of creating or inventing new spells or new ways of using existing spells, as it is, remains the domain of the eccentric, or otherwise, luck. A mage is someone who taps into the mana of the world, and casts spells. A spell can be both a skill and not a skill. That meant, it is possible for a mage to read an instruction of how to cast Fireball, and cast the spell, Fireball, without having the skill, Fireball. Having the skill, of course, meant the mage could cast the same spell faster, quicker, stronger and with less mana cost. A mage therefore learns to cast a spell, and with sufficient practice, gains the skill reflecting that said spell, and thus becomes more competent and powerful. Mages also gain a range of support skills throughout their careers, such as mana cost reduction skills, passive mana regeneration skills, or elemental boosts and discounts. The invention of new spells, however, is mostly bouts of madness. A mage tries to mix components of the spells together, in hopes of creating something new. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they fail. A good healer, like myself, meant that they are more likely to survive failures and have the chance to try again. This, of course, supports the persistent mages, those who work hard and experiment constantly. They have some successes, but they will see a lot more failures. The conversation with the Zeratin left my mind spinning, and my artificial minds were hard at work processing the ideas. There are ways to travel across worlds. Void mana. If anything, I now had to consider sponsoring the mages and wizards in our care to dabble in void mana, figure out how that princess managed to do so. It's a risky one. Clearly playing with void mana incorrectly would destroy one's soul spring. Over the decades, my library of books and tomes have grown massively. I had my researchers and mages run through them, to find the clues of void magic. I recall some words back when Madeus still lived. The tomes of the mad hero Arsene Amir. I quickly called on the Valthorns to locate it. It took a few months, but the tomes and writings of the mad hero were duplicated many times, so we managed to retrieve a few copies. Some of the surviving kingdoms on the central continent had a copy in their own personal libraries. Void mana. Exposure to it would cause visions and nightmares of otherworldly horrors. Back then, it was explained to me that void mana was a raw primordial form of mana. Is that explanation then still true? Quite a few of the mages professed their reluctance to experiment on void mana. It seemed that the history of man is littered with mages killing themselves through incorrect use of void mana, and no one has figured out how to correctly use them in the first place. Knowledge of void mana isn't entirely rare, and is used mostly as a reminder of bad magical practices. Some of the mages commented that void mana can be collected, in small amounts, by way of runic formations. However, the runic formations usually must be located high above the ground, usually in towers or tall secluded places that are exposed to the night sky, and a large anti-magic barrier must be present, such that the runic formation is clear of all other mana. Then it is a matter of waiting and luck. Sometimes, the runic formations will collect a small bit of void mana. Most of the time, nothing. Collecting void mana when the two suns are present is impossible as the light will cause the void mana to decay. Of course, their comments were very strange, some points seem to contradict my existing knowledge, and I believe there's quite a bit of misinformation in that know-how. What is void mana? I asked Lilies. Greater than some say it is always around us, but just undetected. Some come across them purely by luck. Less than. I have an entire continent. Surely if it is luck, the statistics would point to me having seen it already. Greater than perhaps it is invisible to you, as you rely on spirit vision. Less than. Fuck. Dash. Year 153. There was not much time to rest. As we saw rifts opening throughout the central continent. It was a magically fascinating thing to see space and reality crumble and break apart to reveal these gashes in space. We redirected all the magical sensors and labs to the rifts, and wondered whether the demons use void mana too, or perhaps they have some substitute for it. Are the rifts void mana? Eon. Demons spotted on our continent. Your command. Kavio and Valthorns came to meet. Ring-fence all the rifts, and let our forces fight them. Naturally, what else is there to do against demons? We should aim to take this opportunity to level up the forces. Alert me to all demon champions. As you command. Some of the smaller rifts spawned only ordinary demons. The demons resembled large skeletal structures, a bit more like animated skeleton animals with some dried flesh. From this alone I am predicted an undead-type demon king. Since it wasn't a problem to suppress the rifts, I've started setting up labs closer to the rifts, hoping that my sensors will figure out what they are. Has anyone ever touched a rift? I asked the entire council and the Valthorns. Not that we know of. What if we touched the rift? There was silence. I decided to try, and on one of the smallest rifts, a bunch of vines and roots reached out and attempted to hold the rifts. It was weird. The rifts seemed to be both a physical and magical thing, and alternated between the two. It felt like touching a floating snowflake that promptly turned into a puddle of water. There was a frequency. I could feel it, the way the energy of the rift ebbed back and forth. I instinctively attempted to match its resonance. Master, the vines went through. Patrick noted. What? The vines got to the other side of the rift. I could still feel them, and it could go through if the magical pulse was at the right regularity. There was a sensation of incredible dryness. My vines had to draw more water from the network. Sand. Rocks. But very, very dry. About an hour into it, the demons seemed to realize. The small rift quickly closed and cut off my vines, now left on the other side. Did you see or feel anything? I asked Patrick. Patrick had used my eye ability on the vines, to see what's on the other side. Patrick gave me a series of images. It felt like I was looking through the eyes of the Mars rovers, an alien world filled with massive spires and large, red crystals. An army waited at the other side. The vines eye turned and looked back at the rift. We saw a large ring-shaped gate structure, and the rift in it. Around the platform of the gate were 6 massive arrays of reddish-black stone. It glowed in both red and a blackish color, at intervals. There were also more of those red crystals, further out, connected by some strange chains. The demons then spotted the vine, and the portal promptly closed. That was the end of it. But I saw enough. Demons. Alien worlds. Gates that opened the rifts itself. Could I tamper with the rift next time? C-124 Snatch Trios. Year 153 continued. Each rift had a different frequency and resonance, but it was still possible to align it. The Beetles and Valthorns fought demons by the thousands to gain access and reach the rift. Again, no big deal. With Lovis' new demon-slaying power, the regular demons were easy. Under the effect of the demon-suppressing aura, these demons were more like slow-moving zombies. Together with my subsidiary trees spawning up to the rift itself, it wasn't hard. Once they managed to reach the rift, They too tried matching their mana to match the rift, but they struggled to do so. They do not possess my ability to manipulate mana in one's body at such great detail. I did, after all, face decades of corrupting demon energies, and also use mana for magical soul surgery. All of these meant I was capable of incredibly subtle mana control, and I could handle the fluctuations in these frequencies. I tried wrapping a beetle in my vines and then sending it through the rift. It didn't work. The vines went through, but the beetle just bounced off. Again, my vines and roots went through the rift, and once I had vision, I immediately activated my subsidiary trees on the other side of the rift. It worked. The subsidiary tree instantly spawned beetles that fought with the demons on the other side, and bought me some precious time. My vines and roots grabbed the red crystals, those red stones, and pulled them through the rift. Then I saw the giant demons. Massive bony mammoths. Their magical blasts destroyed my subsidiary tree in a single energy attack. Ah, the rift was closed again. But I got them, the red crystals. Never mind, there will be more rifts. The demons seem like they are unable to stop opening the rift. I hauled the red crystals back to my labs for analysis. They were not demonic in nature, and instead, they are void mana batteries. Each of them were slightly depleted. One of them exploded suddenly and left a massive crater, killing a few Valthorns and destroyed a few hundred beetles. The Valthorns got the message, and so they maintained a large distance from the crystals. Another one exploded when one of my lab trees prodded it with too much mana. The void mana inside is clearly quite unstable and is prone to strange behaviors. One of the Valthorns injured in the first explosion soon developed symptoms similar to the princess, and testing in the biolab soon proved me right. He had the exact same curse, exposed to void mana. Thankfully, I am far better equipped now, and I have more mana at my disposal. This time, I was about to crush the curse outright. But he lost some of his levels and skills from the void mana. This made me wonder, could I use void mana to remove the hero class? I suppose this is like using chemotherapy to remove a cancer. It's harmful, in more ways than one. There were easily 30 to 50 rifts open at any one time, and from them, out came these undead-like demons. With so many rifts to secure throughout the continent, it was a bit like playing whack-a-mole on a continental scale. This meant our forces and our elites had to be distributed throughout the continent. Hytrerion, my tree walker, finally saw battle, and it was incredibly fun to watch it stomp demons, the same way those demon walkers stomped on us. Have a taste of your own medicine. It's also my first time witnessing the full combat capabilities of a Titan soul-powered walker, and its accompanying army of wood soldiers. Those wood soldiers are quite like beetles, in that they don't have much intelligence. In a way, Hytrerion is pretty much a land-based Protoss carrier, and the wooden soldiers are its interceptors. So far, the first wave of demons from the rifts did not contain any champions or walkers, and were just large masses of mobs. That meant a single Hytrerion was sufficient to secure one rift, or a few if they were located close to each other. Now that I know those rifts are actually two-way gates, I'd like to prepare for an eventual counter-invasion to the demon worlds, and Hytrerion, as a champion-tier creature, would be my advance force. But first, I'll have to figure out how to create these rifts on my own. There's a few good reasons to go to the other side. 1. There may be a chance to figure out why and how the demons are invading our world. This may be one of the best ways to get an answer. 2. More of those void battery crystals. Another matter at hand was whether I should tell Kay about these two-way rifts, that it is possible to go to the other side with some mana synchronization. My concern was, if the gods have a read on her mind to some extent, then if she knew, then the gods must know too. Then again, there are certainly secret followers of the other gods in the central continent, and the gods may have observed my actions. I decided to tell her anyway. She promptly returned to the central continent within a month, and attempted to assault one of the rifts. She managed to synchronize herself with it. Her natural magical gift as a hero meant this was easy stuff. But once she entered it, the barrier seemed to drain a little of her star mana, and then the rift quickly collapsed. Fucking hell. Because the heroes at almost entirely star mana once they pass level 100, and the rifts seem to be powered by void mana, the interactions between the two mana types caused the rift to collapse. Well played, gods. Well played. The heroes can't use void mana since it reacts dangerously with star mana, so they can't use void mana to travel back home, or travel to the world of demons. Of course, this frustrated Kay. So there's this mana type, called void mana, that lets you open fabrics of space and time, and we can't use it because us heroes are loaded to the brim with star mana. But Stella was delighted to learn of void mana. She, after all, did not have star mana, and now, this void mana was a way to go home. I would have to ask the Zerodans whether it's possible to send her back by riding on their backs, but from what he said, it seemed the distance is too far. Conceptually, if the gods have star mana, and I presume that the reaction between void and star mana is still dangerous even at significantly higher levels, how did the gods summon the heroes from far away? 1. The gods stored their mana off-body, i.e. in separated shells. Perhaps the gods have the ability to split their being, like multiple trees in a network. If so, perhaps me and the gods are more alike than I thought. Either that, or there is some distinction between the mana types of the gods. Perhaps Mozart and Gang are gods with void mana, and the Eva, Gaia, Hawa and Nera gods are star mana gods. That there is some kind of trading arrangement between them. Rift secured, Master. Hyperion repeated, and more of my subsidiary trees spawn into place. Throughout the continent, the military and Valthorns have kept the Rift's demons suppressed. After my first void battery, I've resolved that I want more of them, and so, it's time for the Rift robberies. I activated a few more artificial mines, and readied them for the task at hand. Vines and roots resonated their mana with the rifts, and all at once, all of them entered the rifts. We invaded 14 rifts, and spawned giant attendant trees, and subsidiary trees, by the tens and hundreds. Beetles then appeared to fight the demons on the other side. But, the terrain on the other side was incredibly dry, and it was an environmental energy that caused my trees to dry up and shrivel. They won't last very long in that hostile terrain, the ground nothing more than rock and sand. The roots of my giant attendant trees and subsidiary trees couldn't extract any water or nutrients from the ground to sustain their strength, so all the nutrients and water had to be supplied by roots through the rift itself. Never mind. I needed them to buy me time. I wanted a lot of that void mana battery. I would keep them and store them secretly as weapons against the heroes. If void mana reacted with star mana, it made sense that trap the heroes in a void mana battery field would be dangerous for them. 1. 2. My roots pulled. I saw more of those bony mammoths. They used beam weapons and glowing red horns that shredded through my trees. They were stronger on the other side. My beetles didn't last long, weakened by the dryness of the air, and my aura was negligible. Through one of the rifts, I saw a familiar sight. One I saw during the demon's dreams, back when the souls of the heroes were trapped. A massive city-like structure filled with massive spires of red crystals. The spires were everywhere and stretched to the horizon. A massive serpent of bone and decayed flesh spotted the trees and charged at them. Its body glowed in pulses of red and black, and it rammed the giant attendant trees. It crushed my trees easily. Never mind. More crystals were stolen. I've grabbed 25 of them before all the rifts shut off. Still, my rift raid triggered something strange. All the rifts throughout the continent instantly closed. Great. If the demons are intelligent, clearly they figured out that I know how to go through their RFITs. We expect countermeasures. Year 153. Detailed analysis soon revealed something that was quite worrying. These crystals are pretty much demolite, but before they were fully emptied of their void mana. The Demon King's death always left demolite, hence, the rifts would close quite soon after the Demon King was killed. Simply because their carrier of the void mana had fallen. In these crystals, we saw these magical patterns, powered by the void mana. They were almost invisible, and only now we could see them because of the void mana that caused them to flicker into existence. Quickly, I asked for some existing demolite, harvested from the previous Demon Kings. When void mana from the void mana battery was connected to the demolite, those patterns re-emerged. For now I don't know what they did, but the fact that there is a magical pattern in these crystals suggested that they may have other purposes, on top of just batteries. It also made me wonder whether the demon's mana is a form of processed and stabilized void mana. I didn't make much progress on this research, and the demonic rifts remain closed for a good 6 months. At first, I wonder whether this was a way of scaring the demons off. Then the second wave of rift opened. Only a single rift opened, but it was massive. I could see the rift open right before my vision, simply because this rift opened right next to Freshka, very close to where my labs were. Then demonic champions poured out. Large mammoths and skeletal serpents emerged from the rift. But they picked a fight in my home ground, where my aura was strongest. The battle for the good 3 weeks was fearsome, as champion after champion poured out of the massive rift. I had to step in and hold them back, as my forces, now scattered throughout the continent, rushed back. Then, as more of my higher-leveled warriors returned, they took the reins. Jura slew one of the skeleton mammoths single-handedly, and they leveled. Lovis, Edna, Ferris and Jura fought for days, and 10 champions came out of the rifts over the 3 weeks. Jura hit level 125. Edna, Ferris and Lovis soon breached level 95. After the 10 champions, there was a lull, where only lesser demons, the mobs, came out. They died as soon as they stepped out of the rift. My roots attempted to synchronize with this rift, and I noticed they've scrambled the magical resonance. It was no longer the same pattern, but a constantly changing frequency and pulse. Smart, and after a day or two of monitoring I thought I cracked at how they changed their frequency. My roots went through. I saw more demons. They noticed. The rift closed again just as suddenly, then we had another period of peace. The demonic attacks became propaganda fodder for the 4 temples, at first. But then they soon shut up, when they noticed just how quickly we suppressed the demons. Kay was personally quite impressed at how the entire demon issue was kept under control. If every continent had an existence like yourself, the world would be a lot more peaceful. I then pointed at the states and lesser nations engaged in small skirmishes and wars with each other. Once you remove the big bad guy from the picture, those in power merely turn on each other. It's a form of peace, but conflict remains inevitable. True. Unless you want to mind control everyone to submission. That would not be ideal. I may be a tree, but I sure ain't no eye of the moon. Yeah, it's silly. That said, I am no saint either. The Treeology priests and Valthorns engaged in massive social ventures to build positive reputation, and also not so subtle propaganda and emotional manipulation. Just like the 4 temples, we too use a bit of carrot and stick, the stick being fear of life without us, the chaos of the times before. I wonder if Key's smart enough to notice. So, how's your trip to the other continents? Kay rolled her eyes. Well, it's not bad. I see a lot of rebuilding in the eastern continent, all of which progressed quite well. It's been 8 years, but the scars still remain. There's also large groups of refugees in the other continents that are stuck in limbo, struggling to decide whether to return, or stay in their new home, and face a different set of challenges there. That's just life. My citizens have been through that a few times. I've seen so many generations of refugees. The people of this world are used to it. The fluidity of their lives in something they are very well aware of. I am going to use my Heroes Forge and make massive robots. Kay said. The conversation just went off in a 90-degree angle. I mean, after what I've seen on the other continents, I think the world needs a lot more than just heroes. I paused. Seriously. It's possible. I checked. It'll need a lot of materials, though, so I am going to go travel again and find them. I'll be back for the Demon King, though. Which should be in a year or 2. I'll try to convince the other 2 to come too, if they aren't too busy stuffing their dicks into their army of sluts. Language. Kay laughed and left. Tell me more of this void mana. Stella looked through the papers, records and magical books. She's been here for a decade or so, and I think her confidence level is getting better. She still doesn't like to talk to new people, but she's very comfortable with me. At least, to her, I am that voice in her head that's been around for a decade. She is now a level 40 courtly administrator, and unlike the heroes, she had no star mana. She was therefore a good candidate, if I wanted to work on these void mana shenanigans. Void mana was a way home, even if it's extremely remote. I explained it at length, about how the rifts, but I did not speak of the Zerodans. Her earlier classes had merged together, painter and administrator, and for her to touch magic at this point is a great change. The risks of how the void mana can destroy the soul spring and all that, strangely, was not really a risk. If you are right, this void mana is pretty much a reset button. Well, yes. I get to lose all the stats and levels, and start over. Stella said. So, there's really no risk, unless I die, and that's rather unlikely because you have cured people with void mana curses before. She walked a step or 2, then turned. Fuck it, I am in. It's either I get home, or I die trying. Dabbling in void magic is quite like blood magic in some ways. It required magical formations, and also complicated chants. The magical records left by the mad hero, Arsene Amir, documented his attempts to call on the void. Once we cross-checked his history, it seemed that he died when defending his home from the demon champions. A hero shouldn't die to demon champions so easily. There must be something more, but most of those records are lost to the Great Rotterdlands disaster. Still, the magical tome of the otherworldly void was sufficiently interesting. It seemed, per Arson's view, that void mana is ever present in the environment, and the issue was actually collecting it. In low quantities, void mana does nothing, and its reality-disrupting abilities only manifest when high amounts are present. In his own words, Arson actually said that void mana isn't actually mana, but more of a reality atom, that the world was actually held together by void mana. So, generating void mana was strangely easy, according to his theory. Just spread mana to the general surrounding and let the mana dissipate into the world. Occasionally, this would knock off one of the void mana. The difficult thing was actually capturing the void mana. Holding the void mana was difficult unless one had the right kind of item. The void mana would pass through almost all kinds of materials, and would disappear after a while. It was like trying to capture, bottle up bubbles, and hope they don't somehow break apart for long periods of time. It'll take some time. Or maybe I should just reuse the captured void mana batteries. But I am not sure what happens if I do so, especially with the unknown inscriptions and patterns inside the batteries. Do I summon more demons if I do that? Progress with Blackstar gems and demonic hybrid core, none. Attempts to further refine T to enhance mental divine resistance, uncertain. Unable to test efficacy. We gave K various types of T for her to comment on, but again, she isn't really the best judge of whether the gods are meddling with her or not. Research. I've completed the first stages of both the wind to mana and waste to mana research. The seagrass research also meant my knowledge of the surrounding seas is gradually improving, but the vast oceans still remain out of research. Seagrass research, for now, continues. For the wind to mana, waste to mana and wave to mana research, it increased the total mana output by a little bit, but so far, did not unlock a new color for my soul forge. I've added a wide variety of new coastal species to my biological collection too, especially those that live mostly in the sea. It felt a bit like I am expanding in so many different directions, even with Trevor organizing all my various labs and artificial minds. With so many different types of mana, so many different types of new plants, weaponry development, research on runes and blood magic, it feels like I am scattering my resources throughout and hope some of them stick. I don't know what might work, and concentrating all my resources on just a few things only to end in failure is rather depressing. But this process of carpet bombing everything also feels cheap. Like I don't know what I am actually doing. C-125 Those who fight for Tree. Year 155. The rifts opened again. This time, they went back to their earlier strategy of multiple rifts across the central continent. But we were getting better. My studies into the void mana and the demolite had produced some useful information. The demolite has a certain range of resonance with the rifts, that is mostly invisible, except when one has void mana. The demolite's ability to store void mana is actually quite good, compared to almost everything we've seen. The next point, really, is why. The demolite left by the Demon King on this world, does it serve a purpose beyond just a store of void mana? Or does the Demon King need that void mana batteries to travel to this world? Or is there some other purpose? But anyway, our research into void mana and these void batteries made us more sensitive to the rifts, and so, I had about 4 to 5 hours notice that a rift was happening, and also their location. It's just a lot easier to find something when you know exactly what you are looking for. The Valthorns, Hytrerian and all engaged in combat over the next few months, the rifts now popping in and out. They barely stay open for more than a week, and would close as soon as my forces get near. If this isn't proof of demonic intelligence, I don't know what else is. They clearly have some way of transmitting information back to the homeworld, and are able to act on it. Thankfully, the type of demons remain the same. It's still the quasi-undead demons. Is there like some kind of facility in their home world that decides on the demonic themes? As the year went on, it's increasingly clear that something big was going to happen. My sensors were going wild, and I knew exactly where it was going to happen. Of course, we had to be tuned into that specific magical resonance to detect it. I am betting my money on this being the Demon King, and he will appear in the central continent. I am quite sure of it. Immediately, I had that area where we detected the magical fluctuations cleared, emptied of all people, and loaded with all the magical traps and weapons. If a Demon King's gonna appear on our continent, I am gonna hammer it with everything. I also started to flood the area with my giant attendant trees. This was my chance to test how long I can hold out against the Demon King. Kay was on the way back from the other continent. The other two heroes agreed to come as well. It seemed to me that they are compelled to fight demon kings, even if they disagree with me, and have no love for the central continent. Perhaps, it is a requirement of the hero class, that they must challenge the demon king. Of course, my actions were not missed by the common folk, or the elite. I decided it was just right to be forthcoming about it, so I informed everyone that the demon king will be on the central continent. Once again, panic. Schadenfreude. That's the feeling from the other continents and the temples. They delight in the fact that I will have to face the demon king. Damn them. Not that they can do anything to help. I called on the kingdoms of the central continent to share their hero items. Many of them have a few, legacy of their founding heroes, or gifts from visiting heroes. We build bombardment stations, built around the hero items. We can prepare for this, and so we will. The hero items were all supported with massive arrays of mana storing potatoes. If one doesn't hurt the demon king, maybe a few of them together can. Together with the heroes, I'd hope to make this battle a swift one. After all, apes together strong. I even equipped Hytrerion, my massive tree walker, with that cannon of Alantera I stole from the temples. Hytrerion's massive mana pool meant he could support one hero item on his own, and to bolster his mana capacity, we also started research of mana storage beetles. Mobile mana batteries meant to augment Hytrerion's large mana pool. These mobile mana storage beetles started off as beetles with a large mana potato grafted on their back. Over time, the biolabs made improvements to the bond between these mana potatoes and the beetles. Eventually, I even got them to explode if triggered in a certain way. It's a roundabout way of getting back to beetle bannerlings. Point is, I needed mana storage, since the point is to create huge bursts of energy output. We've also planted the entire area with modified potatoes, and charged them up with all the mana I could get. If a demon king's coming, I was going to blow it up as much as I can. Seriously, this is really just camping at the spawn point, isn't it? What if the demon king doesn't spawn here? Kay admired my work when she arrived at the location. We've built multiple fortresses around the demon king's spawn point. My Rift-attuned sensors did not detect any unusual changes. For now, all of them point here. But, sure, can you help? I spoke to Kay. Your array of guns, are you able to place them as fixed objects? Since I was quite certain where the demon king will appear, it is entirely possible to really break this. But is killing the demon king the answer? Kay asked. We did that last time, and all it did was lead to this point here. If you're not willing to help me kill the demon king, then help me immobilize it to a significant degree, such that we can repeat what happened. Kay thought for a moment and then agreed. This is pretty much trying to injure a Pokemon so that you can catch it, but not too much that it's dead. I got that reference, but I just continued. So, help. Yes. She spent about a month using her Hero's Forge to set up multiple cannon arrays. But, her arrays are powered by her star mana, so for now, they are pretty much like single-use turrets that will expire once the star mana runs out. Still, with so many cannons, traps and weapons, I'd hope to at least significantly weaken the Demon King. When are your two friends coming? They said they will come once the Demon King appears. So glued to their harem. So, this is what Mom's been up to. Arlissa said. She had snuck out after I asked Lozan and many others to help with the preparations of the site. She stood at the edge of the cliff and looked at the vast area now cleared into a battleground. The entire area, and anywhere with 50 miles, was evacuated where possible. Overnight, towns and cities in the area were emptied, the people moved as far as they could. We had large convoys of beetles ferrying people from the towns and cities to large dedicated new towns. What are you doing here? Lozan, of course, could sense her daughter from a distance away. It also helped that one of Arlissa's bracelets are enchanted. Arlissa jumped when Lozan snuck out behind her, undoing her camouflage. Mom. Arlissa was about to flip. Wait, why didn't I sense you coming? Your detection abilities are probably too low. Lozan patted her 14-year-old daughter's head. She's a level 34 ranger, and it's considered slow when Lozan herself hit level 60s at that age. But, of course, Arlissa was also taking life a lot easier, and did not have to fight as many monsters as Lozan did. Naturally, her level would be lower. There's also a part of her rebelling by not following her mother's footsteps. When everyone expected her levels to soar, she resisted it. She claimed that she was still trying to figure out her life and didn't want to move so fast. Now, you want to see what we are doing. Is the Demon King going to appear soon? Eon thinks it'll be soon. This entire place is loaded with formations, which, he isn't sure will work or not. Arlissa was worried, and her facial expression reflected that. Will you be fighting, Mom? No, against the Demon King. Hopefully not. Jura is. Along with those who received the seed. But the rest of us will be helping to control the other demons that appear. Eon expects the Demon King to be accompanied by a large army. I see. Dash. The Valthorns went through the plans over and over. K, as the hero, was also involved. The moment the Demon King appeared, we would activate all the weapons and traps against the Demon King, and then only would K engage. One-on-one against the Demon King is going to be tough, but the rest of us will play support. Everyone was in their best equipment. We moved our best anti-demon artifacts to the fortresses around Ground Zero. The signals we detected were increasing, and getting stronger. The tension in the air was rising. And yet the two heroes have not even left their continent. How long do you think we can hold back the Demon King? Based on our calculations and data provided by past heroes, Master, we should be able to suppress the Demon King for at least a day. Our base case scenario varies, but the median is around 6 days. Patrick modeled the potential battle, and 6 days wasn't great. The key is whether K can kill it. Based on our current data points, we should be able to take the Demon King down by about 40 to 50%. Key star mana would have to make up for the rest of the shortfall. That's barring any cheap tricks. Dash. I made progress with my various energy research. There was no progress for the Black Star gems, however. Still, the energy research did not unlock new color. At least, not yet. All it did was add more mana to the pool. It's fine. It was loading the entire area with more mana anyway. Dash. Jura, Lovis, Ferris and Edna were all level 125. It seemed there was a natural limit for experience seeds, and that limit was level 125. All the experience seed did not work beyond that point. Darn. I suppose you can't cheese your way to divinity through experience seeds. They had to earn their last 25 levels. I also gave my 5th soul strengthening seed, this time to one of my patriarchs, Priest Lumuf. He was a level 85. Eonic Bishop. Though he was old, he had a lot of support abilities, and I needed someone like that to support the first 4. Now was not the time to save on experience seeds, so I also pushed him up to level 125. Year 156. The Demon King didn't waste time. The rift was massive, so massive that it seemed like the sky itself twisted. It's coming, Kay said from a distance away. We watched, as massive skeleton dragons and mammoths stepped out of the rifts. The champions of the Demon King. Should we blow it up now? One of the Valthorns asked nervously. No, only when the Demon King is here. There were at least 50 of those champions, and I can't help but remember Harris describing them as fodder once they were at level 130s. They could destroy a champion in a single star mana attack. The Demon King's heads appeared. It was a massive skeletal serpent with large reddish spires along its jagged spine. It had 3 heads, a 3-headed skeleton serpent, one head resembled the skull of a mammoth, one head resembled a dragon, and one resembled a cobra. Everyone felt it. Hold, Kay said nervously. This was her first full-powered Demon King. The last one was a dud. She instantly notified her 2 friends that the Demon King had descended. Indeed. I got the notification the moment its entire body appeared. Demon King Tygash has descended. Its 3 heads roared. The demonic champions, who surrounded the area, turned and charged. I feel a tingle in my network. Fear. Everyone seemed to be caught in its aura and presence. Kay immediately stood straighter and activated her own star mana form. It glowed like a lighthouse in the dark, and instantly, the fear subsided. Point 1. Demon King has some kind of fear aura. Point 2. Heroes have a natural anti-fear aura. Ready. I notified everyone to take cover. It's time for some explosions. All the hero items prepared in the entire area activated, and the first volleys of energy blasts shredded the demon champions. The barrage of bullets, projectiles and beams from all directions, even Hytrerian. It was beautiful. It resembled total annihilation when I let loose multiple long-range cannons, or those old videos of battleships going all out. The valley was filled with the sound of all the cannons and artifacts unleashing fury on the demons and the Demon King. The 50 or so demon champions were destroyed quickly. After the volley, came the traps. The entire ground beneath the Demon King glowed. Overcharged mana potatoes embedded in the ground, configured into a literal mana bomb, and the multiple explosive formations around them. Together, they would explode as one single massive bomb. The single explosion for the mana was so large it could be heard 100 miles away. The fortress braced for the shockwave of energy. The detonation left a massive crater. Where'd the Demon King go? No. It was an illusion. We saw the three heads still floated, surrounded by massive skeletal shields. Those shields looked like they took some damage, and its body was gone. The eyes on the three heads glowed, and instantly we saw its body regenerate. It roared, and more champions emerged from the rift. Kay sprung into action. She could remotely recharge her arrays as long as she's within the area, so the cannons kept up the attack. I felt drained as the weapons and traps called on more mana, but this was the moment we've prepared for. 2 to 3 years of preparation all for this single moment. We unleashed everything we could, as suicidal beetles loaded with mana potatoes on their back charged towards the Demon King. One of the heads roared, and a huge red energy blast torched the walls. We quickly activated defensive shields, but they didn't last very long. The beams were as powerful as the heroes. Tower after tower, incinerated. These fortresses are a bad idea. We should have built them into the ground, instead of above ground. One Valthorn commented, which I agreed with. Tall fortresses were a stupid idea against demon kings with beam weapons. Naturally, things above ground would be in their line of sight, and line of fire. I shall have fortresses built underground next time. At least the earth and dirt helped to absorb some of the damage. The artificial mines helped me reconfigure some of the magical weapon arrays, connecting them to fresh mana potatoes. We needed to keep up the pressure, as more demon champions emerged from the rift. Well, take the champions, let Kay focus on the Demon King. Jura, Edna, Ferris and Lovis stood and charged in. One of the Demon King's three heads, the one resembling a cobra, opened its mouth and shot a huge spire projectile. Where did such a projectile even come from? The projectile exploded into thousands of smaller spires, and those thousands of smaller spires transformed into small zombie-like creatures. They charged out of the crater, and attempted to reach the magical cannons. Beetles. Thousands of beetles emerged and met the zombie army. The mammoth head's eyes glowed, and all the zombie minions glowed and gained strength. A buff effect. Jura hacked through hundreds of zombies and managed to land a finishing blow on a champion. Hytrerion too loaded up its mana beetles and shot another projectile. It impacted one of the demon champions, it staggered and then fell. It was pure chaos as the cobra head turned again, this time it shot a beam at Hytrerion. Shit, it was too big and bulky. I activated all the defensive abilities I had, but it still tore through them. It knocked Hytrerion back by a few hundred meters, and made a large wound on its back. The mammoth head roared and a fire appeared between its tusks. The fuck is that? My sensors went wild. He's multiple arrays fused together into a large cannon, and then fired a purple and white energy beam. It hit the cobra head and the cobra head crumbled. The mammoth head's fire glowed, and in an instant the entire crater and its surroundings were charred with black demon flames. It was a very familiar pain. The fire blast hit the surrounding weapon posts, multiple hero items were destroyed. We felt it as some of my subordinates died. Jura and the heavy rankers immediately dived to avoid the blast, but Faris' staff was instantly torched. Kay had a magical shell protecting her. It glowed white, and she had suddenly transformed. This was the star mana form. Now, she was the core and center of a massive magical weapons platform. Each of its energy blasts were purple-white and contained huge quantities of star mana. It was a form I've never seen, and I wondered whether she was still holding back. Or is this something that only activated when she faces a demon king? Yet, the cobra head, that we thought was destroyed, reconstituted itself. Master. The mammoth's head, there's 10 slots with 6 red crystals on it. Patrick mentally shouted in my mind. I immediately zoomed in. When we nuked the entire place, 3 of the red crystals crumbled, and just now, when Kay destroyed the cobra head, 1 more crystal turned to ash. It's a life counter. There's 6 more lives. Kay, those heads can regenerate. You need to knock them all out at least 6 times. I suspect 9 times in total. They only stopped regenerating if they were out of crystals. I quickly explained the details as we kept up the pressure. The dragon heads turned to glow, and it shot multiple beams. Master. Bad news. Rifts opening across the continent. Trevor repeated. At least 50. Fuck. Most of my high-leveled guys are here. Beetles and get everyone not occupied. Activate the adventurers and the local militia too. I still had a few guys. Horns was not involved in this conflict since he was too low-leveled, but he could help with the other sites. Lozan, need you to take a team and get to one of the rifts. Yet I couldn't distract myself from the conflicts throughout the continent. I felt my entire body tingle, like static, as if I was right next to a lightning storm. The dragon head roared and dragon head launched more energy beams. These beams behaved more like strings than beams, and it destroyed a few more fortresses. Kay flew and weaved between those strings like a pro, but even then, she got hit a few times. The arrays took the damage for her. It felt like watching a Toho game. The dragon head released multiple slow-moving floating energy mines. These were like explosive wisps, and they went in all directions. Eon. What do we do? Edna shouted as she hid in the ground together with Ferris. We're pinned down and we can't get close. They had a few shields up, but they didn't last very long. The flames burned them easily. It seemed that either the Demon King's flames are not really flames, or my resistance just got nullified before the king, or I am still too far. There were about 30 demon champions left, and the Demon King traded blows with Kay. The king concentrated on Kay, and focused its attacks on her. Honestly, the rest of us are just distractions for the two true titans. He's attacks filled the skies, and her barrage of star mana bullets took out demon champions easily, 2 shots, and the demon champion was destroyed. But that was not her objective. She wanted to attack the Demon King, but these champions kept getting in the way. Black Fireblast incoming. I alerted the engaging forces, as we noticed the mammoth head had a small spark of fire between its tusks, again. This second shot incinerated my beetles, and a few more arrays. I got mental notification that a few of the arrays are ready. I had to shoot, or they might get destroyed. Go go go. Right next to the Demon King, my giant attendant trees were nothing more than firewood. Its energy beams ripped through the trees like they were a piece of thin scrap paper. It was a mistake to ask my elite forces to engage in this battle, as they scrambled to flee for their lives. My mistake. Next time I won't field anyone less than level 100. Anyone less than that is nothing more than a liability. It's true that they could help with the demon champions, but with the Demon King's attacks, I couldn't even protect them. The Demon King clearly didn't care for its own subordinates, as it shot beams that incinerated both ally and foe. The Demon King was beyond them, truly. The traps and the cannons were infinitely better choices. Kay, can you push the Demon King to the marked spots? I asked. We had traps made in the surrounding area as well. We were prepared to nuke this entire area to smithereens if we can take out the Demon King. Am trying. She responded as she dodged wave after wave of magical bullets and beams. Her attacks managed to hit the dragon head and it crumbled. 5 crystals left. The rift abruptly closed behind the Demon King. There were no more champions, as Key's projectiles and the few arrays took out the remaining champions. It didn't take long for the dragon head to start regenerating. But it was enough to buy time. As Key's array transformed into massive mirror structure and temporarily deflected the demon's bullets. The sudden shift hit the Cobra head and it too crumbled after 5 or so star mana hits. I quickly attempted to create multiple giant attendant trees around the Demon King and used my vines to latch onto them, when they were still regenerating. There was only the mammoth head now. My vines grabbed onto all of them and I tried to drain them of mana. I heard a voice in my head when that happened. Free USSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSssss. Mental mana in network. Expelling. Fuck. Not now. Patrick and my domain stepped in and blocked off the attack. Pawns. The voice was legible now. I felt it in my head. Shit. Pawns. Master, we couldn't block all of it. We must detach. We must disconnect the vines. Patrick shouted in my head. It's in your head. Pawns. I saw visions of their homeworld again. It was a massive purple world. Long ago. Before the slavers. Massive. Purple. And they were giants. They were all monsters and their cities were massive canyons. Monsters. A primitive society. Fight the slavers. More visions. Large, massive cities of giant monsters. Then, a beam of light. Heat's energy blast weaved through the trees and hit the immobilized mammoth head and it too crumbled. All 3 heads abruptly twisted and fused together, and in an instant, those giant attendant trees were vaporized, along with my vines. The link to my mind broke, and I was knocked out of the vision. In its place, the 3 heads combined, turning into a single head with 3 faces. The dragon, the snake and the mammoth. Was that some kind of symbolism? All 3 mouths opened, and it shot out huge red beams in all directions. Ferris was too near. Still, he kept attacking the Demon King. His attacks made small, tiny cracks on the large 3-faced creature. One of the mouth turned to face Ferris and shot a red beam. It happened so quickly, and he was too near. Ferris was caught in the red beam. He was vaporized instantly. Ferris has died. Fuck. Retreat. I screamed mentally, but it was too late, really. The red beam was crazy powerful. My shields were nothing more than paper before a flood. This power was above and beyond whatever data I got from Harris. When we simulated the past Demon Kings, my shields still managed to weaken the power of the attack, but this was easily 3 to 4 times stronger. Jura shook his head. No. We're this near, and we're this close. It's either we win, or there's nothing left for us. He threw a magical spear. It hit the Demon King's face and caused a tiny crack. His star mana blast managed to hit and it knocked a big chunk off the Demon King's 3 faces. It traded defense and hit points for power. Patrick commented in my head, quickly summarizing that its defensive stats are probably not that high. It's also a relative thing. To K, yes, it's totally a glass cannon. To us, it's still impossibly tough. It's a glass cannon. With 10 lives. Not exactly a glass cannon. Still, my eyes were locked on Jura and Lovis, both attempted to get closer. Lovis threw a few magical spears at the Demon King from her location, and it did just tiny bits of damage too. Not anymore. There's only 2 red crystals on its mammoth face. The demon's energy beam and the beam from Kisare had a clash of powers normally seen in anime. The 2 energies met and had a short tug of war, but eventually, Ki's purple-white beam lost. The demon's power pushed through and Kisare was destroyed in another big explosion. The beam was so strong it even burned a straight line for about 10 miles. I felt like a line of trees just vanished from my network. Kay was alive. She managed to dodge sideways, but she had lost an entire limb. Blood streamed out of the charred parts. But she stood, alive and defiant. I immediately sent vines to surround her, and attempted to heal her. At this distance, my root strikes would be weak, but whatever. I unleashed all I could, and summoned multiple giant attendant trees again. The Demon King roared and black flames instantly torched my root strikes. One of them hit the Demon King and caused a little more cracks. Not yet, Kay said. My vines now wrapped around her entire body. Her arm was lost, but my vines quickly applied healing energies to suppress the wound. She lifted her other hand, and her body glowed. Her life force and soul was flickering. I could sense her entire soul spring cracking and crumbling, even the marbled hero blocks. 10 magical large projectiles, they resembled armor-piercing rounds, appeared in the air, made of star mana. This was it, as all of her mana left her body. Her body now felt like an empty shell. If this didn't work, the Demon King would win. A flick of her finger, and all 10 massive magical rounds flew towards the 3-faced Demon King. The Demon King roared, its 3 faces unfurled like a book and took the attack head-on. The projectiles exploded on impact. Each explosion was small, but they were dense with star mana. Each shot resembled a mini nuke on its own. There was a short moment of suspense as we watched the dust settle. It was not enough. When the dust settled, there was still one face. The mammoth face was still there, cracked and weakened. There was no crystal left on its head. This was its last life too. If only the other 2 heroes were here. Kay fainted. Her life force flickered and faded. She was weak and dying, even if I managed to suppress the bleeding. I called on my mana to heal Kay and supported her, but I could sense her soul spring crumbling. The Demon King's movements were sluggish. Its face were filled with thousands of cracks and it roared. His anti-fear aura faded away. I froze. I had flashbacks of that very first time when I met that Demon King, and I remembered how it chopped off my trunk. It felt like old wounds had suddenly reappeared. Their wounds that I thought had fully healed just flared up. Old pains and wounds just burned suddenly, things I didn't even know I had. What do I, Master? My artificial soul's voice broke me out of my flashbacks. Then, I saw Lovis and Jura both charged at the Demon King. Somehow they were unaffected. They were equipped with anti-demon spears and launched an attack together. Their weapons glowed as they used everything they had at the Demon King. What are you guys doing? We have a clear shot. Both of them mentally responded, even though I sensed and shared their fear. I didn't know what compelled them to even try for the Demon King. Their spears crash into the Demon King's skeletal face. The cracks on its face glowed. It's a familiar look. Things I've seen in dreams. It was going to blow. Flames shot out in all directions. Why do they always blow up? Fuck, get the shit out of there. I quickly extended my vines and attempted to drag both of them out of there, and used my vines to latch onto the exploding Demon King. If I could drain some of its energy, the explosion may not be so big. I wrapped my vines and roots around Kay. She was too weak to move in her half-dead state, and used my vines to haul her away. Jura and Lovis ran as fast as they could. I made layers after layers of wooden shields. Everything. I made giant attendant trees too, by the hundreds. I pulled and tried to drain as much energy out of the Demon King as I could. My vines wrapped around the Demon King's cracked faces many times, and my entire body was temporarily flooded with the Demon King's mana, but it wasn't enough. The mammoth face still detonated, and instantly, there was an explosion just as big as my traps. Black, blue and red light cut through my vines and all my shields, and it was as if the void itself was here. What could I do? Wait. Teleport. My star mana ropeway. I wanted to activate my teleportation ability to save them, but I had used all my star mana. The explosion was too quick, and my subsidiary tree was charred before it even completely spawned. The blackish energies exploded and caught Lovis, K and Jura. I tried to shield them, but the energies attacked my roots too, and it incinerated them instantly. The energy felt like a shockwave of radiation, and it interfered with my roots, vines and trees' ability to regenerate. Fuck. I was far away, but if I had a human heart, it was like watching a tragedy unfold before my very eyes. I felt it sink. I wanted to deny this reality. No. Jura was closest to the Demon King, and the impact of the blast was strongest on him. Even with all the shields and power I could muster, it was nothing before that king. His entire body was pierced by the light, and charred by the explosion, and he collapsed. Jura. He died, even though my vines tried to reach him. I tried and tried to create shields, and I saw Jura activated his familiar to shield himself too. But the explosion was too strong, too dense. The notification I dreaded came in. Jura has died. Phewick. I mentally yelled. Lovis managed to escape a little further, but it wasn't enough at all. Just like Jura, the demonic rays pierced through and charred her body, and she died within seconds. Lovis has died. Eons Demonslayer class was released. K was much further away when the radioactive shockwave hit. It tore through the layers of wooden vines, and I felt the rays pierce through the wounds. But at the same time, I thought I felt a strange flow push back at the demonic radiation. Something equally powerful, if not stronger. Yet, I got a strange notification. K has died. You have received a fragment and a titan soul. Then I looked at her again. Her body had fused with all the vines. Her heart is beating. My vines had entered her body through her destroyed arm, to keep her alive. She was no longer human. Only her face was left intact, but her body had melted into this strange part crystalline, part tree vine structure. There was a heart in there that was still beating. I could sense it with my vines. It was no longer a normal heart. It was a crystal. The crystal collapsed instantly and formed a cocoon made of crystal and a huge tangle of roots within. What happened? I asked. Then one of the artificial minds flooded my mind. I saw the explosion rip through Keith's body, but then, she glowed. A part of it crumbled away, and a part of it remained that pushed back against the wave, like how a magnetosphere deflected a solar flare. In that process, the shockwave caused her body to shift and change. Demon King Tygash has been destroyed. Due to your excessive contribution in the fight against the Demon King as a non-hero, you have been granted a special experience multiplier. You gained 27 levels. You are now level 197. Jura has bequeathed the skill, Warlord's Barrage. Skill absorbed into Root Field. Root Fields upgraded to Fields of Death. Lovis has bequeathed the skill, Spear of Destruction. Skill modified and changed to Roots of Destruction. Ferris has bequeathed the skill, Vine Control. The following skills have been merged. Healing Vines, Constrict, and Absorption to Root and Vine Mastery. I couldn't check the rest of the skills. I had to pause for a moment and consider what had just happened. So I didn't. I'll get back to the skills the next time. Oh, I died. Jura's spirit appeared in my soul realm the next day. So did Lovis and Ferris. I figured that would happen. I'll disappear in a few months, right? It was a strange feeling to see him there. I am sorry. I should have put them through that. But against the Demon King, could I even think of holding back my best fighters? No. Jura shrugged. I am glad I did it. To fight a Demon King and manage to land a hit to finish it off. If that's not going out with a bang, what else is? Lovis agreed. Thank you both. Jura smiled. I am glad we still have these few months to say my goodbyes. C-126 Bitter Triumph. Year 156 continued. Edna stood in the ruined battlegrounds. It was now filled with deep gashes and cuts, most of it from the damage left from the Demon King's numerous beams. We couldn't even find Faris' body. The beam had vaporized him, and what's left was a few trinkets that were not caught in the beams. ... Life remains so frail. She knelt and touched the dirt. She saw it firsthand, when the beams burned through the air. So frail before the Demon King. Faris was Edna's closest friend. They were peers for over so many years. And now, she touched the ground. The dirt and earth in the entire area was magically charged. It was something I would study later on. The Demon King's magical blast also transferred some of its qualities to the remaining dirt that was not destroyed. Jura is a spirit in my soul realm. So this is what it's like to see things from your point of view. Jura, though, seemed really relaxed and free. I have always wondered what it's like to be a spirit. Do you want to stay in this world, Jura? I'll find a way. He had a few months. Jura shook his head. I'd like to see what's beyond that, please. The death promised to all elves who died with their spirit trees. Let me just say goodbye to those who I cared for. This meant the original elves. And the Valthorns that he personally trained. Many were in a way his closest friends and family, even if not related by blood. We died gloriously, but no big state funerals, please. Jura said. There will be one, for all who died in this war. I wanted to insist. There were many others who died, and they deserved a proper burial. It's the first time anyone has participated in a large-scale battle against the Demon King. It was a somber event. Throughout the continent there were many battles, and there were deaths there, too. Thankfully, most rifts were relatively low risk, with only less than 5 rifts had demon walkers or demon champions. After the destruction of the Demon King, we quickly redirected our attention to those demons. But the lag meant death. Relatively speaking, it was good for us. The central continent lost about 100,000 people to the demons, most of them when one of those demon champions got close to one of the cities or towns. Low, relative to the huge numbers lost on the eastern continent. Throughout the entire war, about 200,000 was lost. Again, good numbers, good numbers. Yet the death of Jura, Faris and Lovis felt really personal to me, especially Jura. You really want to go? I am sure I can figure out something. Perhaps a soul contract or something to keep him here. Jura just nodded. I think it's time. The next generation can take over my place. The young Valthorns, many of them have great potential. No. Please reconsider. Jura shook his head. Eon, you've done so much for me and I am grateful. We've fought many battles together, and achieved much. To see Frika grow to new Frika, only to lose it, and then rebuild as Freshka has been wonderful. These few decades were incredible. But I've died, and I would like a peaceful passing. I sighed mentally, but I think he could feel it. Very well. I will dearly miss your presence by my side. There's still a few months. Many of those who died in the conflict actually appeared in my soul realm. Some would stay for days, some for months. Often, it's their own choice. Using a combination of Patrick's mental powers and my own soul realm, we used it to grant special mental audiences with the dead. It's a special ritual. The priests called it the communion of the passing, for those who remained to say and say so much. Many, though, did not want to die. I felt a little selfish and hypocritical then. I would go to great lengths if I can resurrect Jura, but for the rest of them, I wouldn't. A soul contract made before death would have been an easy resurrection solution, since I can redeploy them as something else. Yet, I felt for young orphans who've grown up and lived almost their entire lives as my swords and shields, to drag them to service again through soul contract is exceptionally cruel even for my standards. They have given me one life as my weapon, and they would return experience, skill seeds and level seeds when they die through the familiars. For the general populace, it was a sense of relief that the Demon King disaster passed by so quickly, in about a day. Perhaps, this was the fastest we've ever killed a Demon King, because we could predict where the Demon King appeared. If the demon's intelligence is real, the next time won't be so easy. Kay was not dead, but the system thinks she is dead. It was incredibly weird. Her body was entirely a mixture of crystal and vines, like an overgrown laboratory. This is not what I expected. She looked like a golem. A crystal golem. She lost her hero class when the blast happened. It stripped her of all her classes and levels, and she was temporarily level less. Then, because the healing happened simultaneously as the Demon King's blast stripped her soul of all her soul bricks, she didn't actually die even as the loss of all her levels somehow made the system think she died. My friends think I am dead, right? Kay said. Most likely, if they get the notification. Then let's keep it that way. Ah. Shit. This meant the advantage has just shifted to the heroes again, now that Keese lost all her hero powers. They most likely won't believe that this golem is her either. Shit. Am I going to face the Crusades next? How do you feel? I asked the golem. She shrugged and moved. The first few days after the battle, I thought she was dead. After all, that's what the notification said, and it had never been wrong before. The heart kept beating, pulsing. I thought it was just residual energies that caused it to beat. Then she moved after a few days, and talked. Kay looked around. Right now, she was in a resting area within the Valley of the Unrotten. I wasn't comfortable letting her wander around in Freshka. Not yet. Anyway, surprisingly fine, even if this body needs getting used to. Kay was incredibly nonchalant about the entire transformation. If anything, I suddenly have a clarity of mind that feels amazing. Her golem body was mixed with organic elements within, and anyone who laid their eyes on her would immediately say she is an abomination. Really, consider the implications that the system could be wrong. What else is wrong, then? Also, the demonic blast was able to strip a person of their soul and levels. If so, could I replicate it to ultimately free the heroes from their traps? I am now a level 1 biocrystalline construct with no classes. Do you think this is just a copy of my soul, and the real me is really dead, or this is really me? There's no true answer for that, is there? I could see that she still has a soul, but if most of a soul has been stripped away, is it really still her? It reminded me of the ship of Theseus problem. Good answer. Kay laughed mechanically. I should gain levels. Can you help me? Certainly. I secretly guided Kay to a patch of the Rotted Lands, where she can fight hybrids. Edna had gained levels. She gained 14 levels from the battle, so she is now level 139 as an Eonic Grand Knight. She is stronger, and yet at the same time, she is cursed. Eon. How do you do it? To watch our friends perish. She was actually trying to cope with her own loss. Ferris and Lovies were her friends, and as fellow Valthorns, they were really close-knit. I've lived with certainty that my friends would survive. Drunk on our own immortality. When you are a level 100 plus, and it's normal to feel like you'd never die. I honestly have no good answer for you, Edna. Jura is my most loyal warrior, and he had served at my side since the days when this valley was a village called Frika. His loss and his presence will be something I keenly feel for decades, perhaps even centuries to come. Edna nodded and wept privately. We all lost a friend. This struggle against the Demon King destroyed too many friendships and relationships. When you told us you wanted to stop the cycle, I honestly thought I understood it. But only now do I see and feel the real cost of this struggle. It will be a path paved with the blood and bodies of our friends. Victories all have a price. I said, despite my own struggles with Jura's death. Edna didn't reply and continued to cry alone. An hour or so later, she responded. Well, if I stopped now, Ferris and Lovies would have died for nothing, isn't it? Indeed. Ferris, Lovies and Jura's spirit watched that same conversation. Ferris just sighed. I felt like I died like a chump, though. Just a bad position and the death ray just killed me. How does one even stop such things? Lovies nodded. I think there must be a way to strengthen our body such that we can resist it. At least, we should be able to survive it. Jura nodded. That explosion at the end was extremely disgusting. To think that a demon king almost always self-destructs when it is defeated. Well, almost all demon kings self-destructed. We should have prepared with some kind of instant teleportation ability. Ferris nodded. Yeah, the next generation of Valthorns must have the ability to perform instant short-range teleportations, and also super-enhanced senses. There are skills that can grant the ability to temporarily supercharge one's senses and reaction time. Strangely, the three dead spirits were a lot more analytical. Perhaps, now that they are dead, the best way they can contribute is to think about how to prevent their own deaths. Edna was back to work after resting for 2 weeks, and then she had a session of mental communion with Ferris and Lovies. A part of me felt numb. I've always known that as a tree, I would eventually outlive everyone around me. A magical tree that does not decay nor age, but only grows larger and more powerful over time, it is inevitable. Greater than always. One eventually turns detached. Friends eventually become just tools. To lose so many, so often, one learns to draw lines. Less than. At that moment a human part of me resisted. No. I must have courage to constantly make friends and trust them. If I become more like lilies, eventually the Valthorns will just be numbers on a battlefield. I would be nothing more than a general, safe in one's nuclear bunker, pressing buttons. No, I didn't want to become desensitized to this. I wasn't prepared to lose what little left of my humanity just to accomplish this goal of stopping the cycle. I am already a murderer and slayer of thousands, enslaver and mind controller. To lose even friendships and trust, that's just the next level. Even villains need to have people that they can trust. No. Great villains all have people that they can trust. Greater than time, and cycles. Cycles, repeating lives and conversations. Less than. I paused. Greater than it hurts too much to see those who have fallen, in those that still lived. Like a widower who sees a woman that looked like a splitting image of their deceased wife. Less than. I sighed. Maybe Lily's has a point. But I believe I should try. I owe it to those who live to give them a chance. I can't just wallow in grief and never move on. No. I will trust and I will make new friends. Even if I will have to suffer and watch them die eventually, it is only right I continue doing so. A tree survives disasters and storms, and still blooms when spring comes. The scars did not alter its will to live and love. Once the state funerals and about a month had passed, I was finally prepared to revisit the huge wall of notification that I received. I gained 27 levels and I am now level 197. Due to your excessive contribution in the fight against the Demon King as a non-hero, you have been granted a special experience multiplier. You gained 27 levels. You are now level 197. Jura has bequeathed the skill, Warlord's Barrage. Skill absorbed into Root Field. Root Fields upgraded to Fields of Death. Lovies has bequeathed the skill, Spear of Destruction. Skill modified and changed to Roots of Destruction. Ferris has bequeathed the skill, Vine Control. The following skills have been merged. Healing Vines, Constrict, and Absorption to Root and Vine Mastery. Level 190 Domain Skill acquired. Court of the TreeTree. Court of the TreeTree has a 50-member limit. Possession of the Devoted now merged with Court of the TreeTree. Those granted the Court familiars gain abilities similar to those of the Devoted. Court of the TreeTree does not require star mana. Those who served never truly die, their abilities are recorded and retained. Jura, Lovies and Ferris abilities and skills are elevated as zealots of the ancestry. Court members function similar to familiars. You've gained the ability, Summon Court. Court members can be instantly teleported to your location without any mana requirements, with no use limits and restrictions. Skills of those who died with the Court familiars are absorbed. Level 180 Domain Skill acquired. Natural Dungeons. Grants ability to trigger new dungeons. Each dungeon must be powered by either a leyline or magical formation of equivalent power. Dungeons are not subordinates and are mostly independent, but you have some influence to control their difficulty level and strength. Each dungeon generates rewards and monsters based on the chosen difficulty and strength. Active Titan Soul capacity increased to 5. Root Strike significantly upgraded. Root Strikes and Super Antidemon Root Strikes merged and now all automatically have anti-demonic effects. Healing abilities significantly upgraded. Vines now can perform instant healing by touch. Wooden materials significantly upgraded. Strength of all wooden items made significantly upgraded and gained passive skills. Giant Attendant Trees defensive abilities and force projection significantly upgraded. Giant Attendant Trees now able to recreate up to 66% of Eon's original strength over long distances. Familiars significantly upgraded. All familiars gained additional skills and abilities. All familiars are now greater familiars. Biolabs and other labs significantly upgraded. All labs now are significantly more attuned to demonic energies and rift-related energies. Overall physical defense and magical defense significantly increased. Demonic curse dispelled. It was a long one, but ultimately it's still numb to me. All these abilities were achieved with the death of those close to me. And was it worth it? These abilities enhanced my strength and defenses. There was something extremely bittersweet of receiving powers like Court of the TreeTree, which would have allowed me to save Jura, Lovies and Ferris. It's like having the ability to close the stable doors after the prized horses have left the stables. Yet it's clear that during the battle, He's magical powers did at least 60 to 70% of the damage. Regardless, these small steps all lead me closer to that eventual day. The rest of the central continent had some reconstruction to do, and privately, our intelligence services indicated most of the other temples were amazed how quickly the Demon King was defeated. Yet, despite Keith's death, there were no concrete plans for a continuation of the crusade. Just rumors and discussions. I wonder what changed on their end. Lausanne and Lofen were both most affected by Jura's death at the battle. They spoke to him too via the mental communion. Arlissa only sparred with Jura a few times. After all, her training was mostly conducted by her mother. To her, Jura was that uncle that seemed to mostly accompany the crazy tree. Yet, Arlissa too, witnessed the destruction wrought by the Demon King. The craters it left behind all still had residual magical energies, and already labs are in full swing, conducting research. Lozan tapped her daughter's head as she guided her through the battlefield. She wanted to see what happened to all the traps and fortresses, and she was greeted by the hellscape. The land will heal. Eon's powers would soon undo all the wounds of the earth. Which is why you must see it now. When the wounds are fresh and the earth is torn asunder. Lozan said. The magical residue was gradually being cleaned up. Beetles hard at work, they dug and carried them back to the labs for studies. Those of us who received Eon's blessings are more sensitive to the land, we can feel the subtle flow of the energy in the ground, the same way a druid could. If it scares you, hold my hand. Lozan assured her daughter. Are all battles like this? Arlissa was both impressed and fearful. It was quite a sight, and the terrain's energy meant the weather was just as chaotic. Storms and thunder seemed perpetual, and I could feel my own mana wrestling with the unsettled air. When the opponent is a demon king, yes. But this is a lot more common. Even demon champions can deal huge damage. We've seen things like this back in the eastern continent. Lozan spoke, and she remembered her own time in the wasteland that was the eastern continent. You fought them before. Arlissa suddenly seemed really impressed at her mom. Only the champions. Lozan said. Never the king. But Uncle Jura did. Yes. Lozan said. If the other heroes were here, maybe he did not. She couldn't finish the sentence. Can Eon fight the king? Arlissa though, quickly switched the question. Lozan paused for a moment. I don't know, Arlissa. Maybe, maybe not. Unlike us, Eon cannot move himself to face the demon king head on. Then they'll have to lure the demon king so that Eon can smack him. Lozan smiled and patted her daughter. Now that's an idea to think about. If we ever face a demon king, what can we do to survive? She wondered. Honestly, unlikely. You may not even be able to run, since its attack range is clearly very far. She pointed as the gashes in the earth, which stretched for miles. Even the hills in the distance were not spared. There were many destroyed forests and trees in the area, often from a stray energy beam, or a deflected projectile that exploded. Then we'll just accept our fate. Arlissa looked back at her mom. Lozan nodded. Pretty much. Unless you are someone like Uncle Jura. He died a hero, a true champion of Freshka. But his path is not for everyone. Arlissa the little rebel frowned. She was underleveled in many ways, at least, compared to the Valthorns of her age. Already there were young, upcoming Valthorns just about 15, or 16, that had reached level mid-40s in their chosen combat profession. Still, she watched the ruins, all the fortresses, so strong and sturdy before this, flattened in a single battle. All those magical traps and hero items activated, and it was still insufficient. The destruction truly hammered in how small she was in the larger scheme of things. Without levels, one has no say in what the world can throw at them. Without levels and skills, we are just lambs for the slaughter. Lozan said quite frankly. Our world today is changing thanks to Eon, but should he fall, the world will revert back to its original state. One where might and power makes right. Eon's overwhelming might today is what grants the lesser ones a choice. Without his vast shade, what we have today is not possible. One day, it'll take you to the other continents, there you will witness what the world is like without an overwhelming presence like Eon. Arlissa merely nodded. They had a rest at a makeshift rest stop. The Valthorns had set up multiple viewing points, since there clearly was an interest in disaster tourism. Lady Lozan, what a coincidence. There were not the only visitors. Many nobles too came to see the destruction. Some hoped to see Demolite, but somehow this demon king did not leave any behind. Those in the Freshlands Treaty College even organized large tours for the students to see the destruction for themselves. Ah, Lord Kravake, what luck. The Tree Lord smiled. Fascinating, isn't it? Even though it does pain me to see the land in such suffering. The treefolk could feel the damage when they walk, their exposed feet have little feelers and roots. He turned to face Arlissa. And you must be Arlissa. The young girl nodded. Taking in the sights, too. Lozan asked. Yes. How many lords and kings can even claim to have seen the sight of the demon king's death? If anything, this is an experience unique to us. Kravake smiled. Lozan laughed. Indeed, it was heaven and earth, if compared to the vast destruction of the eastern continent. Here, the nobles are talking about tourism. Arlissa merely listened as the nobles continued their conversation. Even if her mother said she wasn't a noble, no one would believe it. In the eyes of the entire continent, her mother was a member of the nobility and perhaps, even as close to a continent-wide royalty. Thanks for fighting with me all this while, Jura. I said one day. I could sense that his soul would soon move on. He just smiled. It's not too bad. Cassern once said, death comes to us all, but for some earlier than others. O tree spirit, take good care of them, those who still lived, and in your court of the TreeTree, truly, elves that die with their spirit trees, never truly die. May you have a blessed life. At this point, his heart was already set, and I was not going to hold on to him forcefully. Forcing a soul to do what it doesn't want to do, outside of soul contracts, is something quite against the nature of soul and spirit trees. I am blessed enough, TreeTree. The heights I've reached, the battles I fought, few can even speak of. I am sure Ferris and Lovies feel similar. He bowed in my soul realm. I remember I knelt that day when I returned to Frika. I returned expecting to see nothing, and how this tiny village has gone through so much change. Destruction, and then reconstruction. There will be more change, but I know they will have you to guide them. I felt sad. Maybe it was that tiny fragment of humanity left in me. Goodbye, Eon. May we meet again, in your next reincarnation. In the long run, we will all meet again. Indeed. C-127 Splicing Roots. Year 157. Jura departed, along with many others for their onward reincarnation. Their souls will go on and rejoin the world, eventually. But my mind still swirled with the conversation we had before we left. Why did you attack the Demon King at that time? Did you feel like it was something you wanted to do? Lovies and Jura thought in my soul realm, and shrugged, I am not sure. At that moment, it felt like it was something we should have done. I knew I had a shot, and I just took it. I didn't think of it that much. I see. Darn. Is that should have done some kind of Demon King influence? How do I separate what they did as whether truly their own free will, or some kind of godly influence? How was Jura and Lovis' action different from K when they met the weakened Demon King? Maybe we will cross paths again. The world keeps reincarnating everyone. Those who died will take new forms, but forget everything. Maybe he's already reincarnated as a baby in the central continent, and I wouldn't know it either. The day immediately after he left, I felt lonely. It was strange to lose his presence, and in some ways, was just as bad as that time, when I was trapped and imprisoned by the demon fire and corruption. We will be here for you, Master. My artificial souls reassured me. I felt similar sentiments from the trees, everywhere. They've done this many times, when I felt down and unsure. I sometimes feel that my identity is clearer during these periods of loss. I know. But time for grief is over. With the Demon King killed, we've merely reset the timer, and there's a lot to process. I believe it's quite unlikely for the Demon King to appear in the same continent twice, consecutively, but then again, it's quite obvious there is some intelligence on the other end, so they may choose so. Regardless, preparations must continue. Based on that single sample of Demon King battle, we've observed that hero items are clearly super effective. Explosive area traps are also very useful and can deal some damage to the Demon King. So, the directive to the rest of the continent is clear. We needed a lot more high-density magical munitions. Things that I can stack together, or use as projectiles would be great. My anti-demonic weapons were useful, but somehow, against the Demon King, their effectiveness was just average. If there were bombs loaded with anti-demonic weapons, that may be a way to mash them together. Either that, or the Demon King itself isn't a demon element, thus it did not feel or suffer any weakness from anti-demon weapons. My gut feels this is the most likely case, that the Demon King is unique and different from the rest of its spawn. After this battle, I also feel that depending on the anti-demon advantages I have to carry the day feels risky. It's entirely possible that the Demon King can adapt and have changing elements, just like some overpowered Pokemon, or the spawn Demon King just has specific resistance. Thus, generic weapons should be more successful in the long term. Il also can rely on this arsenal against any rogue hero that decides to come my way. Edna was stronger, and firstly we noticed her stats gains had accelerated. Her 14 levels effectively tripled her overall strength. It seemed my earlier theory was not correct. The catch-up to the heroes triggered a lot earlier, at level 125 onwards. That said, even with these levels she is still behind the heroes. Her movements were quick, even faster than Jura and the best of the rangers, despite being a knight. This kind of power is surreal. Edna said privately. If she was anywhere mad, the utensils around her would break, and the ground itself would crack. If she stomped the floor, it would break too, unless I reinforced it. Her shield abilities too had shared in her growth, but those abilities made her feel bitter. The same way I related to my new court of the TreeTree. Bittersweet. But no matter, it's time to test it out. The court of the TreeTree essentially allowed me to award special familiars to up to 50 members, and these 50 members are each like the possession of the devoted, with a wide array of extra perks. The best perk is the retention of abilities from past warriors, and 50 members meant I can keep the best abilities of 50 of my best warriors. One of them kept about 10 of Juris' best skills. At least, I won't have to totally start from scratch even if I lose those that I helped to level. In Edna's case, she wanted Lovis skills. She thought the mix of Lovis offensive skills would be a great complement to her current defensive abilities. Oh, I get it, Lady of the Court familiar. Edna said, and briefly activated Lovis spear skills, and she was able to move and attack with the exact pose as Lovis. After Edna used her move, she just stood there for a moment, quiet. She muttered something to herself, so quiet I couldn't hear it. But I could tell it's a feeling of gratitude. I have something to discuss. Yvonne asked one day. I've seen the strength that Edna now possessed, and I'd like to know whether it's possible to remake us in that manner. I mean, it's an open secret that you've been helping them gain strength, and I don't know how it's done, but I'd like to know whether it's something that can be done for me. I was puzzled by Yvonne's request. She's at level 70 as a training tree. I want to fight. I've trained so many and hope that my training is enough when the time comes. But after I've heard of the battles against the Demon King, I feel an urge, a calling within me to fight once more. I didn't answer. I didn't know whether I should. Kay had gained about 40 levels in 1 year. She adapted quickly to her new form as a crystalline golem. At level 30, she evolved, and the crystalline golem was taller, more refined and more flexible. Now, she could look like a crystal statue and her colors could change. I honestly like this body, she said after a battle with hybrids. I have not started the whole dungeons thing, not yet, anyway. Really? Why? It's just a feeling. Like, I am more aware of my body, and I can change it if I don't like it. And I feel like $1,000,000. And I am shiny like a diamond. She laughed. Did she just try to joke? I mean seriously. I can sparkle like I am so fancy, like why no, a vampire. Vampires don't sparkle. Yes they do. No they don't. What are the kids reading these days that vampires sparkle? Unless they are golem vampires. She paused and seemed to think about it seriously. They must be blood crystal golems then, since they need blood to replenish their strength. I didn't want to continue this conversation, it's getting absolutely retarded. Let's not talk about sparkly vampires. Your friends, they've not said anything, or made any pronouncements since you died. Well, sort of. Why? Are you guys close? I thought we were. Kay said. She made that I don't know pose. But I guess I am out of their strike zone so they don't care anymore. And we've been apart for years, pretty sure the relationship between us isn't tight anymore. We've drifted apart, pretty much. Really, our friendship's really so weak and brittle. I mean, to be fair, for highly mobile and powerful individuals like them, relationships are difficult. Everyone else treats them like they are someone to be feared, or someone to be obeyed. Equals are a rare thing, though to me, I guess I am lucky I have been meeting those that I do consider my equals, like Lily's. I don't know. I guess we're just not that good at being friends. We've been sent here together and friends out of necessity and convenience. I honestly feel you are a better friend than they are. Truly. Kay said. Even Astia feels like a better friend, as aloof as she is. Speaking of Astia, attempt 494. She said, as she swirled mana before her eyes. She was surprisingly determined when she actually got down to it. In the past few years, she gained 25 levels as a mage, and her focus is attempting to touch void mana. Anyone with a brain would put 1 and 1 together and surmise her performance must have something to do with her late bloomer ability. Level 25 as a mage is pretty low, of course. It makes her just slightly ahead of an apprentice mage who are normally around level 10 to 25. Void mana was both hard and easy. Controlling and containing it was extremely difficult, but easy enough to generate, if one did not care for one's own health. So Astia had numerous visits to the Soul Forge for repairs. Home is a great motivator. Indeed. Though I don't have much there, I still feel like I have a duty to return. At least, with this, I have the choice to return. What if it's a one-way trip? Then I will have to live with it. But that's a bridge I will cross when I get there. Astia, our Stella kept practicing. At night, she would sleep and use my dream academy. She seemed to be really into this whole mage thing, but it took time for magical studies to pay off. Magic is such a broad and deep subject that mastery takes a long time for most common folk. It's a lot harder to develop ocean grass than I expected, and the clear problem was the lack of sunlight. Is it still a plant, if a plant does not depend on sunlight and perform some kind of photosynthesis? One of the easier shortcuts is to go the way of lilies, which meant large floating platforms with roots that stretched all the way down to the ocean floor. But the ocean is also home to massive waves and typhoons, and the monsters that live in the oceans are huge. The seafarers bring home tales of their ventures on the high seas, of giant leviathans and krakens, of ancient sea creatures. For now, I concentrated my work on expanding seagrass to most of the continental shelf, the land where the seas are somewhat shallow, and light can still reach the sea floor. Already I've made many discoveries of sunken ships and other various hidden treasures. There's nothing quite like a constantly growing seagrass to truly scan the sea floor for sunken items. So, as the development kept going, I had a very pleasant upgrade. Giant attendant tree variant added. Seagient trees. This allowed me to add giant trees on the shallow seas, and more variants to my trees too. Biolabs upgraded. Sea variant labs added. There were more to see in the seas. Fishes, monsters, and even insects. New types of sea insects, sea crustaceans, and also all kinds of plants. There was a patch of sea where the continental shelf extended a little further than the norm, and the seagrass expanded on this path. Then, my rootnet met something new. Foreign thoughts detected. There was a growing intelligence in the mass of sea corals and algae in this part of the sea. An emergent sea spirit similar to lilies in a way. It was young, and I could tell because it was incoherent and a mess. Master, should we block it out? Not yet. My seagrass expanded even more, and we had more contact points with that sea coral reef spirit. It transmitted thoughts, sea, roots, tendrils, fish. It felt like it was trying to learn language, and we responded with words. This went on for months, as it transmitted more thoughts. During this time, my seagrass pretty much encroached on the entirety of the reef, and I got close enough to use inspect. Reef mind. Ooh, there were no details to it, other than the name. I spoke of this to lilies, and they were rather interested. Greater than then I must speak to him. Less than. I didn't know when Valasira the Zeratin would return. I recall that their sense of time is somewhat distorted by the travel between worlds. For now, I kept communicating with the reef mind. Perhaps it will soon speak to me. I also returned to focus on the hybrid demon plants in the Rotted Lands. Now that I've seen what the world of the demons looked like, I wanted to prepare myself for an eventual war on their homeland. Perhaps one of the ways to end this conflict for good is on the other side of the rift. If I could stop them from creating the RFITS for good, or push the battlefield onto their world, that'll prevent the demon kings from ever coming to our world. To do so, I'd have to find ways to establish a foothold on the other side, and have a force that can stand up to the might of the demons on their homeworld. I've seen from the few raids that the power levels of the champions are significantly stronger on their homeworld, probably due to some kind of magic there, and also perhaps to the weakened, dried state of my trees and plants. Now, at the hybrids, I am looking for drying resistance, if there's such a word. Things that can endure a dry, arid environment. I contemplated whether it's a good idea of even upgrading beetles to adapt to such an environment, but Horns, typically, was a massive advocate of the beetles for all environments. He insisted that beetles can be adapted to fight on the dry worlds. Personally, I was thinking of cockroaches. Mainly because the idea of insects in a dry world just reminded me of that cockroach on Mars manga. But I suppose beetles also could do. It's a set of research I have to do secretly, since making plants and insects more demon-like will probably ring all the wrong kinds of bells among the general population. I think it's a good idea, but the portal should come first. I shared the idea with Edna, of course. She was the only one left of the four. Taking the war to their homeworld would avoid a lot of the problems, but personally I think maintaining an open portal will be the biggest issue. Else, any force left on their homeworld is on their own and it's a death sentence. We need your support and presence if we ever step foot on their soil. It's like landing a ship on enemy territory. On that front, I am still working on the void mana. But progress is slow. Mom. Yes. Lozan turned to face her growing daughter. They were home, then. Have you ever thought of stepping into Uncle Jurus' shoes? Sometimes. But I've decided not to. Ian's searching. Right, she said as she munched down her breakfast. Of course. If you know someone, do let me know. I am sure Ian's interested. Arlissa frowned at Lausanne's comment. Your classmates, perhaps. Arlissa was finally enrolled in the Freshlands Treaty College. She initially had a stint with the Valthorns, but due to her relatively low levels and rebellious nature, Lausanne suggested that she try the college instead. My classmates probably can't kill a fly. Oh, Lausanne smirked. I had the impression that the nobles from the outer rings all had combat experience, either on the high seas, or against the hybrid demons. Nah, no way. You seem to think very little of them. That's not a good attitude to have, my dear. Lausanne shrugged. You'd be surprised how quickly people can grow and level under difficult circumstances. Arlissa paused. Nah, they're not good enough. Well, you never know. Lausanne smiled. If you say it that way, why search? Anyone could do it. Arlissa protested. Not everyone desires it, and has the right personality for it. Some things are not about talent, but more about choices and desires. Whether they want to step out to fulfill that role. It's true that after the death of Jura, Ferris and Lovis, there is a gap in the pinnacle of the Valthorns. But the Valthorns is a vast organization, and they are in every sense of the word, a professional army with an even more elite chosen. There are already many other Valthorns with upgraded classes in the level 70s and lower 80s, that now I have to test and train, to push them higher up to their limits and to achieve level 100. More candidates to vet through. Most of these are from the existing training program, essentially my child soldiers, as abhorrent as that sounds to those from Earth. But we can't apply the laws of a world without magic to one with magic, at least, not totally. To these soldiers, this is a career, a legitimate, well-paying career that can get them out of poverty. If one believes everyone has different talents, it would not be a stretch to say some people are just meant to fight, and are good at it. That sort of talent is diminished back on Earth, where everyone is relegated to operate in a capitalist society. With my new dungeon ability, I also have additional ways to test whether these Valthorns are able to perform at higher roles. Essentially, my new ability meant I can spawn dungeons where there is an unused leyline. I don't have a lot of control over what happens inside the dungeon, and no control over the monsters either. But, I can decide their challenge rating, essentially whether these are level 20, level 40, level 60 or level 80 dungeons. The quality and strength of the leyline also affects the max level one could go. So far, the best leyline I found can go up to level 70. I thought whether I could hack into the leyline and make it even stronger, perhaps with a runic formation. That'll be something to experiment on. In any case, a level 70 dungeon actually spawns a dungeon boss at level 80, so that's not a bad challenge for the existing Valthorn elites. From the adventurer circles, normal dungeons rarely go past level 70, and those are considered difficult dungeons. But there are some rather special dungeons where there are monsters in the level 100s, but most of them are lost to time. See 128 Duties and Taxes. Year 158. The peace we have today is one won by blood. Edna explained to the young Valthorns. The order we have today is held together by the bones of those who fell defending it. Peace demands blood. Order demands bones. The question is simply, are you ready to give your blood and bones for the cause? The entire blood and bones analogy was a little too much, and felt a bit like a blood mage or a necromancer trying to win others to their cause. But it seemed to work for hot-blooded young folks. Even the naturally calm treefolk seemed taken by the whole sacrifice shtick. In every generation, in every batch, there is a mix of dispositions, some more reserved, some more passionate. As the one they would ultimately fight for, it's my role to identify those whose fire will keep burning, and burn brighter for decades to come. Based on what I've seen so far, there's no real clear personality indicators to suggest which type of person will remain passionate and loyal to the cause for years to come. Instead, what we noticed is loyalty tends to be accumulated over the decades via little events, and events that increase loyalties for some individuals, do not increase them for others. The young ones all practiced, and Edna adjusted their pose. I asked her to help with training, simply because they would just naturally level faster when someone of a significantly higher level is advising them. Renewal is a constant, never-ending affair. Just as a deciduous tree repeatedly grows after each winter. Class, today, we have Rune and Evan, two of our senior Valthorns. They'll be providing guidance on archery, and fighting with weapons. Students grow and turn to teachers. Teachers change. A new generation takes over, hopefully, better than the ones that came before. Rune is a level 64 Eonic sharpshooter, and Evan, a Level 61, Champion Gladiator. Edna introduced them. They were just as nervous as the kids. Rune was once among them, 15 years ago. Somehow, to return and be one of the teachers was a stressful affair. Kids. Edna patted them both on the back. You'll do fine. Just relax, have a cup of herbal tea if you need it. She smiled at the two younger folks. Rune is a typical elf orphan, while Evan is a female half-dwarf who capitalized on her exceptional strength to win multiple arena battles, thus earning the champion title. The Valthorns are allowed to compete in competitions, but only a limited number. So internally, within the Valthorns, there is a mini competition before they even get to participate. This is because we didn't want to flood every competition with Valthorn initiates, with our dedicated training and high levels. Yet, we do want a presence in these competitions where there are large spectator groups, so we want our good candidates to perform well and help improve our reputation. That said, our best of the best never participate, and there is an internal rule that only those below level 50 can participate in competitions. I do think it's a bit silly, but if the level of competition increases in the future, the level cap will be revised accordingly. The two new trainers were uncomfortable at best. It was hard to connect with young children, it took effort, and practice to know how to speak and get young kids to listen and do things. Even if the Valthorn recruits were already a pre-selected crop. The dungeons opened, and the Valthorns attempted them. The dungeons have some rules, despite the domain powers. For example, my view of the dungeon is always delayed. I can only see what happened after each team completed their run of the dungeon, whether they failed, or they succeeded. Secondly, I can tweak the dungeon settings, but I have no ability to use my powers inside the dungeons. It's like I have a RNG dungeon generator, and I am playing an idle game where I send teams out on expeditions and hope they succeed. Patrick was quick to generate a mathematical model though. After like 10 to 20 rounds of attempts, he already could estimate the chances of success for the dungeon, based on the squad strength. The return of dungeons to the continent also brought a new lobbying group. Adventurers. We wished to petition Eon for access to the new dungeons. Adventurers wanted dungeons. After the borders were loosened, there actually was a brain drain where adventurers left the central continents for the other continents. This was simply because there were no dungeons, and if there were no dungeons, adventurers had little chance of striking it rich by fighting a dungeon and earning a high-tier reward. They were nothing more than monster hunters. Dungeons were a crucial element in the adventurer ecosystem, and previously, the adventurers had to suffer in silence, since, well, the borders were closed. They were not going to get themselves killed by traveling to a continent that killed anyone that came from the central continent. Not anymore. The guild masters were quick to band together and demand the dungeons for the adventurers. Or at least, shared slots where adventurers could attempt those dungeons for themselves. It was a point I discussed with the Valthorns consistently, and after a while, we had a carve-up system. Certain dungeons were marked at Valthorn only, and certain dungeons were free for all. Valthorns were free to join the adventurers on raids, and form their own parties. A 15% tax on all earnings is too high. The guild masters then shifted onto issue of taxes on dungeon rewards. 25% was the initial number, I believe. Kavio walked. The guild masters gulped but then presented that there's actually at least a 2-layer tax. Under most local and regional laws, dungeon earnings were subject to taxes at the local nation level. That meant adventurers had to pay a tax to the local state, and also to the Valthorns. Higher profits will allow the adventurers to get better gear and fight better. If Ian's goal is to get strength, please, consider supporting the adventurers in their pursuit of personal growth. I was rather torn. The taxes helped support the Valthorns, and the Valthorns do have a lot of spending. But I also agreed that for folks that risked their lives for money, a high tax does feel like bad taste. We recommend a door tax. A per-entry tax. The guildmasters naturally preferred a flat tax, since all the potential upside accrued to the adventurers. Kavio looked over the proposal. Well, submit this proposal for further discussion. We're running at a marginal surplus at the moment. The chief of the Valthorns' financial and accounting records was Chancellor Brandick, a treefolk merchant turned lord. He was the fourth treefolk, Eonic lord, after Kravake, but soon found a home in the massive Valthorn machinery as our de facto CFO. The Valthorns' bookkeeping function was frankly a mess as we expanded quickly, and we had revenue sources throughout the entire continent. Compiling income and expenditure reports on a continental scale was a challenge, and continued to be a challenge. This was despite my artificial souls monitoring all the transactions throughout the continent. Simply put, There were simply far too many transactions at any given day for artificial minds to keep up with, and over time, their role shifted to that of auditors, where they merely observed the practices of the Valthorns on a sampling basis. The complexity of revenue had also increased, as with the multiple layers of taxes and jurisdictions. Brandax advised seemed to concur with the guild masters. It would be administratively easier for us if we just impose a door tax. That way, we don't have to calculate the adventurer's earnings and participate in the highly subjective matter of valuing artifacts and salvaged equipment. As it is, we do spend quite a bit of money maintaining valuers and appraisals. Cavio was on the other side. Marginal, Chancellor Brandick. We could use the money for more recruitment. A reasonably higher door tax would pretty much equalize our take from the dungeons, without the need for valuations. It would not be significantly lower, and the chances of high-tier equipment is so low that it's better to let that be the adventurer's shot at the lottery. Let them have their winnings. One of the counselors wondered. Is this related to that report on adventurer emigrations a while back? Actually, yes. Cavio nodded. There's the issue of adventurers preferring work on the other continents as they had far better outcomes with dungeons. Monster Hunter is a stable but not very lucrative job, but adventurers are all, in their hearts, looking for that moonshot. Does Eon have a view on this? Another of the counselors asked. There are some counselors who just preferred to go with everything I decide. Bootlickers. Eon has decided to abstain on the matters of taxation. Brandick responded to the floor. Can't we just override the local authorities' right to tax dungeon earnings? One counselor from Freshka asked, which was swiftly slammed by the counselors from the respective kingdoms. None of the kingdoms wanted to give up their own rights to the tax income, yet, if the Freshlands federal authority shifted to a door tax mechanism, most kingdoms will naturally follow, with their own rates. I mentally spoke to Brandick and Cavio. I'll leave this matter to the both of you. They argued for 2 months, with multiple hearings and consultations with the Adventurer Guild masters, as well as some passionate views from certain kingdoms, and eventually decided to go for a vote. That resulted in a door tax. Then came the next part of the dungeon squabble. Councillor Cavio would like to submit a petition for at least one dungeon in the kingdoms of A to be converted to a public dungeon. Well, there was a tax inequality where dungeons reserved for Valthorn use did not generate tax income for their host kingdoms. Honestly, this entire debacle just reminded me why I hated bureaucracy with a freaking passion. It was a chore going through the numerous interested parties. I felt like being stuck as a project manager with different opposing stakeholders that refused to compromise. I could, of course, steamroll this entire thing through. A few more months passed by. The counselors were pretty much bombarded with lobbies and petitions. The issue of dungeons had a whole lot more vested interests than I thought. Merchant groups who traded on dungeon equipment, crafters and workers who supported and supplied gear to adventurers all lobbied for public dungeons. Valthorns all used Valthorn supplied gear, so their spending in the local cities are usually lower than adventurers, on a per capita basis. Thus, Chancellor Brandick came with a proposal. We propose all dungeons be public dungeons, but all dungeons will have 3 months per year where the dungeons are exclusive to the Valthorns. All existing public dungeons will be rolled into this scheme. All dungeons will have a door tax proportionate to their difficulty. There will be no tax on Valthorn use of dungeons. Fine. These dungeons are cool, Kay said, after she explored the dungeon as a golem with a group of Valthorns. Right, Ika. Ika was one of the unfortunate Valthorns that are stuck as her escort. She's a level 55 Grand Knight. Yes, Cade. Kay had a new name, Cade. She wanted to distinguish herself from her old self, and also, help keep her secret identity safe. Very few people knew she was a hero. Are these dungeons normal? Kay asked Ika. Ika shrugged. I mean, 15 floors seem a bit overkill for a dungeon, and I really liked that big boss fight at the end, and the mini-boss fight. There's a mini-boss. Yes, a few, in fact. There's usually a mini-boss at the end of the floor, too. Good for leveling, really. It's almost as if the dungeon read your mind, Eon. I wonder whether that's just my will spilling into the dungeon system. How frequently can you change the settings? Honestly, none. Once I set the settings, the dungeon is locked, unless I destroy the dungeon. I can't even set what kind of monsters can appear. My artificial minds helped to build a register of the dungeons and their monsters, but even then, the dungeons do spring surprises every now and then. The dungeons are intentionally not letting me into their inner workings, beyond a rung and challenge setting. For a domain ability, this felt kinda annoying. I can't. Oh, you can't even tweak what happens inside, right? Yup. I think it's because the leveling system requires genuine danger. The special dungeon experience multiplier only applies if theirs actually lives at risk, I suppose. K speculated. Special dungeon experience multiplier. What the hell is that gotcha raid shit? K paused. Oh, maybe you don't know, but when I entered dungeons, at least, when I was a hero, I could see I had a passive experience gain buff. I don't see it now, but I think the buff is still there. All dungeons have a thing where people gain levels faster when they struggle in them, I think. What? Wouldn't be fair if you could tweak dungeons, and still enjoy the passive experience multiplier, eh? Fair. If they want to talk about fairness, start with why in the flying fuck do heroes get overpowered level gains? They can reach level 100 within 1 year. 1 year. There's no such thing as fairness when it comes to gods and heroes. If they can stack the game and load the die, why can't I do it too? K paused. Did I say something wrong? I didn't reply. I still stewed over the concept of fairness. Eon, are you mad that I am slacking? Arlissa asked one day. She wasn't the best student, despite her clearly blessed intelligence and natural talent. Somehow, she was blessed with martial talent that exceeded most, but here she is, slacking and dodging classes. Do you want me to be? I didn't want to push the responsibility on her. As far as I can tell, achievement can't be forced, all you can do is offer opportunity. For Valthorns with nothing, they would naturally grab all the opportunities they can get. Arlissa, thus the spoiled second generation, had the luxury of time and nobility to waste it. It's sad, of course, but at the same time, that only meant I excluded her from my plans. I don't know. Mom keeps telling me about duty and that because I am blessed, I should live up to it. I mean, I feel like I did enough, though. Her behavior was familiar, like the clever kid in school that studied just enough to do well, and then spend the rest of her time playing or doing other things. That's why I wanted to ask you. Many others on the continent would give up a lot to be in your privileged position. Whether you live up to your station in life, is up to you. It's very fortunate that Lausanne is an elf, who would live very long lives naturally. It's a safety net very few have. I knew it. She sighed. All this following the footsteps of my mother is annoying. I want my own life. Your life has always been your own. I mean, I want to be able to choose the direction of my own life. That has never been taken away from you. Whatever choice you make, it will just factor into the bigger picture. That's the problem, isn't it? Arlissa frowned. Even if I have the ability to choose whatever I want to be, the gears of the world will move against me. So, only certain choices are realistic choices. In that case, am I really able to choose? It seems you are thinking far too ahead of yourself, my dear Arlissa. I responded. Are you slacking because all the choices scare you? She paced in her room, and then sat down. That's a very good point. You can create dungeons. I wonder why no one ever presumed to ask why so many dungeons appeared suddenly throughout the continent. So, when I discussed the matter of dungeon configurations with Edna, she seemed really taken aback by it. Yes. It is a new ability I gained. She was stunned. Everyone seemed to think that perhaps the god of dungeons was suddenly magnanimous, so dungeons reappeared on the central continent. I see. Of course, me being me, I told almost no one, except Kay, about my abilities. I would have told Jura, but, well, it seems I may have erred in my decision on this. No, wait. That meant all that squabbling with the kingdoms could have been just ended by telling them that the dungeons are all your creations. I had the impression they were aware. No, they were not. They guessed, but it was just a suspicion, and certainly creating dungeons is a level of ability that they didn't think you have. I find their lack of faith in your abilities disturbing. Requesting permission for mind attack. Patrick commented. Denied. Should I say so? I mean, I don't know. It's a strategic decision at this point. If you could essentially hold the kingdoms at ransom by creating or removing dungeons. Edna processed it. That's a good point. Access to the wealth of dungeons is a form of economic leash on the kingdoms is a very good way to keep these herd of cats compliant. We should discuss this with a wider council. Chancellor Brandick, Councillor Cavio, more senior Valhorns, the Triology Patriarchs, the highest lords and kings were there, and of course, it was pretty much an earth-shaking announcement. Eon gained the ability to cause dungeons to appear, and the recent dungeon spring is entirely due to Eon's prolific use of his new ability. A diplomat was quick to display the risks of this news going out. In the holy text of the Gaia Church, it is mentioned that the powers of creating dungeons is one that is vested in the lost gods. By association, the Gaian faith will therefore consider Eon to be one of the lost gods, the traitors who opened the astral way to the demons. Then we must be quick to counter such beliefs. A patriarch said, "Our faith is independent of the other faiths, and so our God's powers should not be linked to the text of another religion. I am of the view that the priesthood should go out and sing praise of this new power." People die in dungeons, and that did not change. These dungeons, created by Eon as they may be, remain a dangerous place. One of the lords had another opinion. Associating Eon with a place that causes death will make Eon seem cruel. Even if those are risks that the adventurers knowingly signed up for. That was also a good point. Creating this place of death has reputational risk. In the history of our allied nations, there have been some kings who had skills that improve a dungeon's characteristics, or improve its levels gain and such. One of the local prince explained. Indeed, kings have all sort of generic improvement skills, some of which target the dungeons in their territory. Such skills are not been associated with the lost gods, if one even believes in such hogwash. This particular local prince was a product of the FTC, and as such, has rather aggressive views toward the outside religions. Kinda ironic, when we are the ones that displaced those religions. So do we tell, or not tell? I eventually decided that this was something to be shared among the leadership team, but not to the general public. They all swore an oath that day to tell no one outside that room. They should know my abilities to some limited degree. At least, I want to begin this process of forming a cohesive top-level force, and I can do that with only a reasonable level of trust. We'll see soon enough if the trust is reciprocated. C-129 Stem the tide. Year 159. The next Demon King won't be here, Edna said confidently. Based on historical records, so far there's only been 2 incidents of successive Demon Kings in the same continent, within the past 500 years. It's actually not that low, isn't it? 2 consecutive Demon Kings imply 4 Demon Kings in the same continent, and every 10 years meant 50 Demon Kings in that period of time. About slightly less than 10%. At least, that's what my primitive mind suggested. Not the best chances, and can still happen. Edna, thanks, not a flag I appreciated having. I don't think I am that unlucky. Edna responded. Edna was merely trying to convince me that we still have time. Our research and development for stronger, more powerful magical bombs and weapons was making progress, but still too slow to really tip the scales. In the past 2 years, we've started training more enchanters and more lapidarists to build stronger, more powerful magical bombs. It's funny that I am back doing what Harris was doing. Back then, he wanted huge crystalline matrices to store my skills. Now, what I am trying to do is huge crystalline matrices to store bombs. Bombs. Lots and lots of bombs. Bomb research tied in with my ongoing hexbomb research, and the idea of a clean hexbomb. That felt like a dirty word, the idea that there's such a thing as a clean hexbomb. As if the twisted tangle of soul fragments, things made via blood sacrifice, can be clean. My regular process of harvesting souls also generates soul fragments. I dislike the term harvesting, since as a soul and spirit tree, my job is actually to facilitate the transfer of souls to the unknown, for them to reincarnate in life. Increasingly though, I am now curious what actually happens after sending them off. Anyway, that's another thing to study. For now, soul fragments of the dead are what I use to make artificial souls and minds. To fuse them in a way that makes a bomb, while still clean, is really one of the oxymoronic challenges, because my very nature as a soul tree and spirit tree is really to repair all these soul damage, not find ways to corrupt soul fragments into bombs. We resumed experimenting on the soul fragments, and set up large mana batteries around the Valley of the Unrotten to do so. Dabbling with soul-related matters still required a lot of energy, but not as much as they used to. It seemed that my naturally higher levels and domain abilities contributed to a discount. We attempted a few different kinds of research. One of which was to manually stitch the soul fragments together, and figure what shape creates what sort of effect. We know for a fact that hexbombs are imperfectly connected soul fragments, but why? Is it the irregular shape, or type of connection, or the base nature of the fragments? Do the type of fragments matter? At first, I thought it didn't, but then as the research continued, it's quite clear there are some differences in the nature of these fragments, especially in the type of death. If so, that's a bad sign because the power of blood magic is then inherently tied to the nature of its sacrifice, that the fragments must be made in this manner to generate that level of power. I believe it's possible to separate the emotions from the fragments, but if the emotions are the fragments, then We reviewed our experience clearing the hexed lands, and it took a lot of brainpower mainly, to disentangle the hex. I wonder how did that work, that drawing out the negative emotions so that they can dissipate, does that actually support the view that the emotion and fragments are separate, or was it both? At the same time, it's a known fact that some extremely traumatic deaths can generate ghosts and haunted monsters, and so, are those ghosts and haunted creatures similarly a product of that person's soul fragmentation on death, and those fragments then transformed or created a ghost? There had to be something. Death and blood magic must be linked. Arlissa went on a tour of the cities and places of the central continent. Despite being an average student due to her lack of effort, she was enthusiastic at the opportunity to get away from her parents. You seem very keen on traveling to the other cities, Lady Arlissa. A fellow student around her age said. Arlissa theoretically should have graduated, but she decided to stay on. The Freshlands Treaty College does have a core syllabus that's aimed to replicate the 40-5-year university experience, but there are a lot of optional subjects, and even the core syllabus changes year on year. Arlissa nodded. Yes, Arcania. The group was mostly commoners. Most of the noble-born students had their own continental tours already, but the Freshland Treaty College wanted to recreate a similar educational exposure for its commoners, so they had a tour arranged. There were other nobles too, most of them less wealthy. Still, there was no shame in the tour, since many of the academic team participated. I've wanted to visit the coastal cities for quite some time. Did you participate in last year's tour? I didn't. Arlissa shook her head. I wanted to, but something came up. Arcania was a lizard woman, from one of the riverine towns. They were relatively rare previously, but a few decades of stability helped their population to regrow. Have you ever been there in the past? No. Maybe my mom took me there when I was a small tiny girl, but I can't remember any of it. They both smiled. Well, I was hoping that you knew your way around. I've got to visit some relatives and pass them some souvenirs. But I guess I'll just have to keep walking around and ask whether they've seen any lizard people. Arlissa chuckled, and made a joke that would be inappropriate in more socially developed societies. So the whole stereotype is true. All lizard people are connected. Arcania laughed too. Well, to some extent. We are a small species. Truth was, they were once more common. Their cities were centered around the swamps of the inland lakes. Most of those lakes and the swamps were flattened when Sabnok blew up. So, what's left of the lizard people that went on to reclaim their lost land all came from a small pool of survivors and outlying villages. They benefited greatly from the Valthorn's social services, especially the incubation pods, specialized childcare centers, and nutritional tree saps. Young lizardlings were frequently starved of nutrients, and it seemed they have a relatively low survival rate. It was also particularly troublesome as infant lizardlings were pretty much animals and had very monster-like aggression. Their sentience and awareness seemed to just pop up when they passed their second year. In the case of lizard young, it was particularly important to prevent their lizardlings from escaping. Their society has a very strange relationship with their children. To them, the sentientless children were monsters, and their own people have no qualms killing the young lizards if they were exceptionally aggressive. To them, a child is only a lizard child when they gain their will and intelligence. Before that, monsters. They also have no concept of parents, and practiced a case of pooled upbringing, where everyone contributed to raising the newly sentient children. Everyone was pretty much related, and the females would deposit any fertilized eggs in a central location in their village. Till this day, this was something I have not been able to process, that they are able to have that emotional distance from their spawn for that first 2 years. Cousins. Yes, everyone's a cousin, or an uncle. We do have our own words for it though. Arcania smiled. The lizard people repopulation program was one of the few success cases on the central continent, but one we rarely talk about. Lizard people generally face a little more discrimination than others, particularly because lizard people prefer to work and play at night. Daytime they are often observed to be lazing about, and thus they have a reputation as being lazy. Still, they are one of the best nighttime guards, and are very good counter-assassins, thanks to their extremely keen sense of space and movement. But I believe they are 2 generations before us. Each village a family, each generation a batch. Arlissa nodded. The tour was a large one. Easily 500 students in this batch. For the commoners, they were split to about 6 different batches, so that everyone would get their chance for the tour. The academic staff would rotate to participate, along with a group from the Valthorns and the Triology. The largest beetles were used as transport. After all, once all the other support staff was included, this tour was a 1,000-strong tour. Entire inns were reserved for the tourists. It spoke of Freshka's evolution from a town no one knows to the spiritual capital of the continent. The soft and hard power it now controlled. The sea. Arlissa spent about half an hour by the sea before leaving. A little disgusted. The sea's the same everywhere. Arcania said. The ports too. Forever messy, and filled with the smell of salt, rotten fish and people who didn't have showers for weeks. I thought lizard people don't shower. We do. Some of us. Arcania smiled. Were you expecting something different? I don't know, actually. Arlissa said. Maybe what you need is space. Away from whatever that kept your mind occupied. Perhaps your mother. Arlissa shrugged. Perhaps. Communications with the reef mind continued, and progressively, I began to feel like its mind was forming up. It no longer felt like it was a clueless thing clawing randomly. The images and scenes it brought up were all new, different, and it repeated, as if getting confirmation. About 2+ years since we made contact with the reef mind, it finally attempted its first conversation. Greater than reef. Greetings. Less than. I heard its voice. My group of artificial minds allowed its attempt to communicate to reach me. I responded. I would one day hope to bridge this communication with Lilies, and also Valasira. Perhaps Valasira could visit it directly. Greater than reef. Happy. Less than it is happy. Greater than language. Difficult. Less than. What is this reef mind? Is it a dungeon core? Or perhaps just a collection of reefs and corals that somehow gained consciousness and a soul? It paused. Reefy did not attempt to speak for a while, but I could sense a lot of thoughts floating about. Those thoughts sometimes vaguely touch the roots at the edges of the reef. I wondered whether it's appropriate for me to refer to it as Reefy. I awarded my second special class, Eons Field Scientist, to a middle-aged dwarven alchemist named Alka. Alka was just a level 39 general alchemist, and he's spent the last 40 years working on growing highly powerful crystals from simple raw materials. He made some progress, but as with research, it's often an issue of resources, just as much as knowledge. To try everything and see what works, requires one to be able to afford everything. If a researcher is financially distressed, the research usually would not progress. The materials needed for labs are expensive, especially when dealing with items possessing magical potential. So, when Patrick summarized a list of contractors and researchers that supported our attempts to develop more potent crystal bombs, Alka somehow came up. I interviewed him, and somehow, perhaps an instinct or a gut feel told me he would be fit. I will sponsor your research, and you will have a set fund. Chancellor Brandak's office will handle it. And all I gotta do is find ways to make bigger, stronger, magical storage crystals. He wasn't confident. I mean, I could read his mind and I knew he was acting, but he still attempted to put up a confident face. But as it turned out, he should have had more confidence in himself. Yes, I notified Chancellor Brandak to set a reasonable budget, but something on the lower side. 2 months later, he displayed the first multi-layer crystalline bomb. In short, a 2-stage crystal bomb. Its performance was impressive. It was a deviously simple solution, and I wondered why we were so obsessed with getting better crystals. A set of interlinked crystal bombs, with mutually amplifying spells stored, could be made more powerful than a single large superspell. Honestly, when I saw it I felt like I was an idiot. What's stopping us from making an entire super lattice of crystal gems, all configured to cause a massive chain reaction? Crystals store magic and mana, and are meant to go off at a trigger. A chain of crystals that is meant to trigger when the others trigger, arranged in such high density, will explode from the sheer mana density and the entanglement of the different spell types. You want the spells to only interact when you want it to, but the crystals also need spell shielding so that they don't interact prematurely. See the problem? More crystals, more shielding. More shielding, harder to trigger and less efficient. Alka, liberated from the financial challenges, went full speed ahead on research, and so, I decided to award him my special class. Simply because I needed someone to work on this. I was prepared to build massive nuclear bombs if it meant I can end the Demon Kings easily. If he could solve this multi-crystal amplification containment puzzle, we're well on our way to magical nukes. Once I have magical nukes, I am gonna try to send a few across the rifts. Sorry, Pacific Rim and Avengers. I know nuclear bombs across portals are not new. So, along the line of portals, Stella, or Astia, managed to actually gain a special class. Void Mage. This was after she accidentally hurt herself a grand total of 73 times, and cursed herself in the process. That process has been generally beneficial for me too. I gained a rather specific skill in dealing with Stella's void mana exposure. Skill. Greater resistance to curse obtained. Skill. Curse breaker obtained. Void magic. Progress. This was a good affirmation, and dispelled one of my earlier concerns. I was worried whether this void magic existed outside the system. It was not uncommon, at least from my memories, for certain types of magic to exist outside the system. Void magic seemed likely to be one such thing. Stella's skills were rather lame, really. Void fist, void punch, and void walk. It seemed that the powers of the void were indeed powerful, but it didn't seem particularly different. But, under the hood, when I looked into Stella's soul spring, that was when the differences were clear. Stella's once clear soul spring was now pure, pitch black. It was like black oil poured out of her spring, her soul now a conduit for the void. The skills existed in her soul were mad black blocks of things, and resembled the curses she had, but now a solid form. All this came at a high price. She lost all of her earlier artist or administrator levels. But somehow she still did it. The call of home was a lot stronger for her. I wouldn't be able to go home. Not in this shape. Kay said. Earth would bomb me to hell, or put me in some kind of exhibit. Kay gained more levels, and one of her stranger powers was the ability to change the surface and color of her crystalline body, allowing herself to actually pass off as a marble statue, or a stone statue. Stella didn't really care much. I gained the Void Mage class, but where's my portal? It's probably something you need to discover. I keep trying. Maybe it's just a simple void equivalent of a teleportation spell. And so Stella attempted to learn teleportation, but with void mana. It didn't turn out well for the first 5 times. It resulted in her rupturing her soul spring, and needed special repairs. Stella was knocked unconscious and in a coma for a week after one of the incidents. Strangely, despite her soul spring now entirely black, she can still cast regular spells and still tap into normal mana. Weird. Where did it come from? If I could get hold of the Void Mage class seed, I would be able to seriously manufacture void mana. I suspected that void mana may well lead me to a new color for my soul forge. I also wanted to know whether I could make specialized void trees. I theorized it should be possible, in the same way I could have star mana producing leaves. Maybe the end goal is like a single grand unifying mana and soul theorem. Something that would bridge from star mana, to hex and blood magic, to this void mana shtick. We should design a response plan if the other continents ever get attacked by the Demon King. Lausanne proposed one day to the Valthorns. I saw the destruction of the eastern continent firsthand, and we too suffered the destruction of the Rotted Lands. Though it may feel nice to see them suffer for their past crimes against our aggression, the vast majority of the populace is not complicit in their crimes. We should give aid. Aid does not come free, and if we are to provide assistance, with all due respect Lady Lausanne, we must use that opportunity to spread his divine faith. The faith of Eon. That'll trigger a war, a diplomat suggested. At least, from the more aggressive nations. Lausanne nodded. Understood, which is why we must have a plan. There must be nations which we can ally with, or be friendly which, who can then act as our beachhead. Somewhere for the regular folk to retreat to, and somewhere, that we can push back at the demons, and stem the destruction. Save lives. I believe the key problem is that Eon is immobile and remains firmly rooted on our continent. It is his grace and divine protection that allows us the luxury of this conversation. It is our fortune and luck, and their misfortune. Some of the lords really take the shoe polishing and esquissing to the next level. The scary thing is, because of years of brainwashing and propaganda from the Freshlands Treatiary College and Triology, they actually believe it. It's unnerving, but this is the outcome of my own actions. I wonder how the Emperor of Man felt when after millennia, his followers worshipped him instead of speaking to him the way he wanted. Can we transplant Eon's trees? A lady asked. I mean, that's what druids used to do, right? Transplanting trees with magic. Fuck no. After a century or so I am not moving. I mean, just the lesser trees. It's something worth considering, and merits discussion with Eon himself. Kavio answered. Chancellor Brandick, Alka, Edna were all in the audience for this proposal. We have 6 years at least, to plan a response. Lausanne said. I propose we identify friendly nations on each continent, and start making the necessary preparations. We can have seedlings and smaller plants moved over. But does Eon's divinity and presence carry over? I had the impression his powers cover only the central continent. Maybe it's an issue of quantity. With enough trees and seedlings he could project power. It was an interesting discussion, but I wasn't about to reveal that all the trees I controlled so far are linked via a massive network of roots. There were certain groups of priests who felt we were too fixated on the central continent and wanted to preach on the other continents. They would be delighted at this news. How do I make my divine presence felt? Perhaps a portal, with roots. Like how I invaded the demon world temporarily. C-130 Journeys to the Century of the World. Year 160, Part 1. The ruins of the demon king Tygash were converted into a memorial for the dead. I felt it was appropriate, now that my powers have gradually restored the damaged terrain to almost 90% of its former self. It was just a little memento, to remember those who sacrificed themselves in war. Once the terrain was restored, it would be hard to tell this place was once a hellscape. A city would be built here, over time. A war-focused one, of course. At the same time, this place, now that I've undid the damage, actually did have residual magical energy that could be used, so I made a dungeon. It's just sweet petty revenge on my part. I will train multiple generations here, with the energies of the Demon King. On the topic of ley lines and dungeons, we also explored ways of enhancing these magical but naturally occurring geological features. Ley lines seem to be the mana magical equivalent of sunspots, and now that I have a massive map of the central continent's ley lines, it did seem somewhat evenly distributed across the continent. Somewhat, and that did imply areas where there is a particular lack of ley lines, and areas that have lumps. What are ley lines? When dealing with only a few ley lines, this was a particularly pointless question to ask. But with a continent's worth of ley lines, I could start making some inferences. Ley lines naturally occurring. Akranif, the wolf. Creating them is impossible. I disagreed with that. The fact that there's so many of them across the world implied something. 1. It was something created from the land itself, perhaps by way of agglomeration of energies. 2. The sunspot analogy suggests that the world's core has some kind of mana field that creates these ley lines. Lilies explained one day. Again, ley lines can move over long periods of time. This clearly suggested a mana magnetosphere kind of mechanic deep in the planet. A mana-tosphere. This is quite like how magnetic poles can shift over time. If these ley lines have no polarity, then it makes sense that its distribution is random since there is no repelling force. Could the elemental features or colors of the ley lines be a way these ley lines differentiate itself? Patrick theorized that the colors are a kind of polarity, so instead of just north and south for magnets, manas have multiple poles, perhaps. This theory was dispelled when we analyzed the colors of the ley lines. Black and blue dominated the colors of the ley lines. There were also neutral ley lines with no coloration to it, and these were by far the most common source. If there is a polarity, there should be a lumpy distribution of the colors, but that's not what we are seeing. It's random. Perhaps it's more of an electricity-like mechanic. The core is just a source, and there's something on the surface that causes the mana from the core to arc to the surface. This would be like plasma globes. The plasma filaments are thus the ley lines. Also possible, but does not explain coloration. Our research into ley lines were primarily driven by two things. 1. Can I supercharge ley lines to make super powerful weapons? The existing ley lines are not powerful enough, so, can I, using my natural powers, influence or cause the energies to gather in such a way that the ley lines become significantly more powerful than they normally are? This thought process is a bit like attempting to use canals and channels to accumulate multiple smaller streams into a larger river. 2. Can I use multiple ley lines, or enhance ley lines, to create dungeons with significantly higher level cap? This would allow my level 125 Urs to level up quickly, and thus achieve the level needed to counter the Demon King's next attempt. Firstly, how do I interact with ley lines? So far, I have been on the receiving end of the ley lines' energies. Are there historical records where mages attempted to meddle with ley lines? I sent out an order to the Valthorns, and then to the various mage guilds. I got close to nothing. Very few people ever recorded their meddlings with ley lines. I am sure multiple mages have considered whether it is possible to tap into such natural circumstances for power. It's likely most of them died when exposed to such power. I tried meddling with ley lines. I went back to the earlier ley lines, like the ones that held my 3 trees of mana. I extended my roots, attempting to follow the flow of mana deep into the ground. I went as deep as I could, following the subtle fluctuations of mana. I've gotten a lot better at sensing and following the traces of mana, after all. That practice. My roots can also stretch deeper than before. The ley lines seem to all head to the center. There must be something down there. No. The distance to the core is massive, I reckon. Assuming this world is no larger than Earth, that's still some 6,000 kilometers of distance. Could I dig that far down? Yet, I felt this challenge was one I was incredibly well suited for. I have various tunneling skills, and abilities to extend my roots. If I could create little microclimates and pockets as I dug downwards, I'd run into whatever's down there. Perhaps even magma or the planet's mantle. I should be able to break past the crust. So I did. A tree's journey to the center of the planet. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I felt that now was a good time to try. I would dig tunnels with my roots, and eventually, at the limit of the roots' range, I would create a large pocket of space. I would then spawn a giant attendant tree there. This renewed my roots' range, and allowed me to extend it further. The roots supplied water and minerals for the attendant trees to survive, and the tunnels itself supplied air. It was a long, laborious and somewhat boring process. But I eventually got in deep. Minerals and strange metallic ores, crystals of all kinds were here. And that damned black as coal blackstar gems were aplenty. Gems. Ha. They might as well call it blackstar coal. That's a better name for it. It also got hotter. And hotter. I dug. And I dug. I dug for weeks. The heat was still manageable. Thank goodness for my various resistances. Then, I broke through the hard crust, and if I could say my jaw dropped, it did. I had stumbled into a pocket of space down below the crust, and instead of just rock and minerals, I saw the remains of a civilization one did not recognize. Deep down here, it's dark and without light. There is hardly any oxygen, save those that somehow managed to make it down here through my root tunnels. But my spiritual senses could still see the structures, ancient, preserved, buried in such depths. This was at least 100 miles below the crust. Title: Rediscoverer of the Magmarian Dwarf City earned. Magmarian dwarves. I thought to myself. All the people that once lived here were all dead. Long, long ago. But their massive towers and structures remained, mostly made of a metal I did not recognize. There were no bodies, no one on the streets. The structures looked like they've been untouched for eons. I spawned a giant attendant tree here, at the edge of their ancient city. The earth seemed to have caved in on them. Was this my fate if the Demon King's corruptions overwhelmed us? Did a similar event happen to them? I noticed how the curvature of the rock above their city was almost perfectly round. They must have had a barrier or something of that sort that shielded them. My roots spread through their ancient city. It felt like I was in a post-apocalyptic movie, the last man walking down a deserted city. There was little sign of chaos, the ancient structures looked beautifully preserved with hardly any damage. It seemed no war happened here. Their city was quite large, and I kept going. My roots spread through the city's tiled roads. The tiles were old and easily gave way to my roots. I could use this city as a secret hideout for the people. There were all kinds of buildings. I spawned beetles, my heat-resistant variant. Down here the heat and pressure was quite high, and my spiders would not do. The beetles then fanned out, searching for life. Would there be survivors? I think not. There were no vegetation in this area. Certainly these Magmarian dwarves did not survive without food. Unless they ate rock. Maybe they ate rock. My beetles highlighted some buildings of interest. My roots followed. Temples. Ancient, massive temples. Made of an even stranger metal. No. Crystal. My roots approached, and I felt something push back. Magic. The temple surrounded by steps, like a pyramid. Crystalline columns surrounded the temples, each had a statue on it. Statue of creatures. A four-winged bird, a scorpion, a dragon with a halo on its head. A dog with two balls of flame. All sculpted out of crystal. Were these dwarves some kind of Egyptian equivalent? What levels of wealth did they reach to do so? The temple itself was the first building I saw in this entire city that crumbled. My vines snaked up the stairs and then, as with vines, crawled up all the crumbled walls. I saw a large broken statue inside, a humanoid structure with its head gone. There were words on the building walls that I did not recognize. All scrubbed off. What happened here? Another group of beetles highlighted something else. Another set of temples. These temples were still intact. They were also made with the same materials, and the same crystalline structures. There were no statues inside. My roots spread and then we reached the center of this city. There was a vast domed building, solid and made of a mix of crystal and metal. It had no entrances, no holes. It looked like a tomb. I had to know, so my roots attacked it. The crystal was strong, and it held through the first hit. And the second, and the third, and the 10th. But it cracked at the 20th root strike, and my roots now had a hole where it could enter. And for the first time, bodies. Ancient bodies all preserved in crystal. At least 10,000 bodies. I sensed no life in them, Their souls have long since departed. At the center was another crystal, but this crystal seemed like an equipment, rather than a structure. There was a lot more intricate, and I sensed fluctuations in its energy. It was reacting to my spiritual sight. My vines then touched it, and the crystal attempted to draw mana from me. I decided to give it a bit. The crystal glowed and responded to the mana, and then, from it, an apparition appeared. It floated right above the crystal. It was a hologram. A magical hologram. Today is the 24th year since the fall of the Deimos comet. We remain trapped underneath the Deimos comet's tremendous magical sludge, and our attempts to break through the sludge has not been successful. Our archmages theorize it would take at least 10,000 years for the chaotic energies from the sludge to dissipate. Magical sludge. But it's all dirt to me. Our fellow sister cities are all equally trapped by the sludge. It paused. It was that same man, but he looked a lot older. Today is the 46th year since the fall. Our food stockpiles have run out. Our archmages have been working hard daily to create food, maintain vegetation, and keep us alive. But things are honestly bleak. We expect not to survive for long. I've called on the archmages to start our self-entombment. We may as well give ourselves a peaceful death. It paused again, and it flicked to a different scene. A different person. Chancellor Mar has been entombed. Honestly, at this point, everyone's given up, and well, me too. We're trapped in this hell. Who would have thought a comet would have ended our world so easily? Our prayers to our gods have all yielded nothing. Eras, Geis, and Dayar, we prayed to you. He sobbed. But nothing. Not a word. Why have you forsaken us? Doomed us to this. It flicked again. A different person. We pray to the gods Eras, Geis and Dayar, may we be protected even in death. It flickered again, and another person appeared. I am the last one here, the last mage priest of the Marga. I assented to the wish of the others for their peaceful death. In my anger and hatred for our fate, I destroyed the temple of Eras. Eras has abandoned us in our time of need. Where was he when we needed him? Is this it? Trapped in a city underneath a massive layer of molten sludge. It paused. The same person then continued. The jewel of the Margma's protective barriers continued to hold. I had attempted to disable it, but I failed. The jewel remains untouched. Underneath this dome. I refuse to die. I will continue to experiment on the jewel. That was the last image. There's another jewel. My roots quickly explored beneath the dome, and indeed, there was a large subterranean structure, a series of tunnels and walkways. These dwarves built relatively sophisticated cities. Then I saw it, about a few hundred feet beneath the dome, through walkways and stairways. A bright blue crystal, still faintly glowing, but slightly off-center. It was no longer on the pedestal, but still on the platform. There were a few bodies around it, all dead. My roots and vines reached out, and briefly touched it. You have obtained an ancient relic, ley line lens, focusing shield gem. A ley line lens. Such a thing existed in the ancient world. I spawned a few more attendant trees outside around this ancient city. This time, I attuned them to the magic in the area. Indeed, I've been following the ley line all the way down. I spread my roots, and then noticed that there were other ley lines that converged here. The ley lines on the surface were like streams of a river, and here, in this very ancient city, those streams converged. Taking that logic that all the ley lines we saw on the surface were nothing more than little branches of the same whole, the core would thus be the great ocean. The ley lines here were a strong, robust blue and also black. Multiple colors mixed here. But over the millennia, it had moved, shifted slightly. Like how rivers reshaped the land, and like how magnetic polarities moved. The ley line lens was now off-center, no longer along where the ley lines were focused. I moved the ley line lens, placing it back on its pedestal, properly. At first, nothing. I adjusted the pedestal, moving it until it was focused along the invisible paths of the ley lines. It suddenly glowed, and then, it emitted a vast, powerful shield that covered the entirety of the ancient city. Yet, it did not cut off my roots. It had somehow taken to my roots signature, identifying I am a friendly party. The shield was back. If the ley lines remained, surely the shield would last. If so, the city clearly outlasted its inhabitants. The shield's restoration also seemed to bring certain structures in the city back online. My roots sensed mana flows in the city itself, and my roots retraced those flows to large buildings that housed other additional crystals that harvest energies from the shield, as a form of power. These were things I've not seen before, a unique set of runes and power. My roots connected to the structures, and I wanted to study them. I spent days studying these ancient runes and the formations they used, and also the crystals. They were regular crystals, but programmed by the runes and formations to function as an ambient mana absorber. It's really cool, and after about 2 months of studying, my subsidiary trees unlocked new functions. New subsidiary tree variant obtained. Crystalline mana trees. Crystalline mana trees are trees with crystals in them. The crystals can store mana, and also be tailored to perform specific functions. Each tree can have only a single crystal type. Tuberous storage upgraded. Crystalline potatoes. Potato mana storage now comes with crystals, and this increases capacity and also ability to store different kinds of mana. New lab variant obtained. Underground living crystal labs.
Allows creation of crystals in a lab. Somehow, the studies meant I had rediscovered the ways to grow crystals in a lab. That's not exactly groundbreaking. I mean, I knew that was possible from Earth, but this was hell of a roundabout way of rediscovering it. Surely, if I needed to make massive crystal lattices, what better way than to grow the necessary crystals myself, than actually hoping to find those crystals out in the wild? Thanks ancient civilization, I am one step closer to lab-grown crystal superbombs. At the same time, there must be something further down there. The discovery of an ancient city so deep underground, I wondered, could this world actually just be layers upon layers, that millions of years ago, this planet was very very small, and each of these disasters just added a layer of earth and crust over it? Is this just a slice of layer cake all the way down? I had to know, so I traced the ley lines and kept digging.